There are objects buried in the earth that shouldn't exist, not because they are impossible to make, but because they were found in the wrong time, in the wrong place, carved by the wrong hands. From a hammer trapped in rock that predates humanity by millions of years to aluminum wedges buried with extinct mastodons. From stone spheres so perfectly round they seem machine-made to maps that show coastlines hidden under ice for millennia. These artifacts exist in museums and private collections around the world, dug up by farmers, construction workers, and archaeologists who had no idea what they were uncovering. Each one challenges what we know about human history, ancient technology, and the timeline of civilization itself. Yonaguni Monument. The waters around Yonaguni Island are known for one thing above all else. Every winter, hammerhead sharks gather here in massive numbers, creating one of the most spectacular diving experiences in Japan. The currents are strong, the visibility can be challenging, but for those brave enough to enter these waters, the rewards are extraordinary. Local dive operator Kihachiro Aratake knew these waters better than most. He had been taking tourists to see the hammerheads for years, always searching for new spots that might offer better views or safer conditions for his clients. It was March 1986 when Aratake decided to explore a section of seabed he had never investigated before. The water was about 25 meters deep, just off the southern coast of his island home. He was looking for hammerheads, but what he found would change everything. As he descended through the blue water, something massive began to take shape in the shadows below. At first, it looked like just another rocky outcrop on the ocean floor, but as he swam closer, details began to emerge that made no sense. What Aratake was seeing defied explanation. Rising from the seafloor was an enormous stone structure, perfectly rectangular, with sharp edges and flat surfaces that seemed almost machined in their precision. The formation stretched over 50 meters in length and 20 meters in width, rising nearly 30 meters from the ocean floor. But it was not just the size that took his breath away, it was the geometry. The structure appeared to be stepped, like a pyramid that had been cut into terraces. Each level was perfectly horizontal, with vertical walls connecting them in a series of platforms that descended toward the sea bottom. The angles were sharp and clean, the surfaces smooth and flat. As Aratake swam around the monument, he could see what looked like corridors, chambers, and even what appeared to be carved symbols on some of the stone surfaces. This was not like any natural rock formation he'd ever encountered. The local sandstone of Yonaguni Island was known to fracture in certain patterns due to geological stress, but this was something entirely different. The precision was too perfect, the angles too deliberate, the overall design too purposeful to be the result of random geological processes. Aratake surfaced from that dive knowing his life had just changed forever. He had stumbled upon something that would either rewrite the history books or force scientists to completely reconsider what they thought they knew about natural geological formations. Within days, word of his discovery began to spread throughout Japan's archaeological and geological communities. When the first teams of researchers arrived to investigate Aratake's find, they were as baffled as he had been. The monument, as it came to be known, exhibited features that seemed impossible for its supposed age. If this was a natural formation, it represented a type of geological process that had never been documented before. If it was man-made, it was potentially the oldest architectural achievement ever discovered. The monument sits in water that was dry land roughly 12,000 years ago, when sea levels were much lower during the last ice age. This means that if humans built this structure, they did so at a time when most archaeologists believe the people of this region were still hunter-gatherers with no knowledge of large-scale construction techniques. The technology required to cut and move stones of this size, to create the precise angles and flat surfaces visible throughout the structure, simply did not exist in this part of the world during that time period. Yet the more researchers studied the monument, the more man-made it appeared. Marine geologist Masaki Kimura became one of the most vocal proponents of the artificial origin theory. After hundreds of dives and detailed analysis, Kimura identified features that he claimed could only be the result of human engineering. He pointed to tool marks on the stone surfaces, to the way certain blocks appeared to have been quarried and moved, to symbols and carvings that seemed too regular to be natural erosion patterns. But other scientists remained skeptical. They argued that the local sandstone was known to fracture along natural joint lines, creating the appearance of artificial cuts and surfaces, Ocean currents and underwater seismic activity could have carved out the chambers and corridors over thousands of years. The symbols Kimura claimed to see were nothing more than natural erosion patterns and the accumulation of marine growth. The debate became heated and personal. Each side accused the other of seeing only what they wanted to see, of ignoring evidence that contradicted their preferred theory. Mainstream geology dismissed the monument as an interesting but ultimately natural formation. Alternative researchers claimed it was proof of an advanced prehistoric civilization that had been lost to rising sea levels. As word of the discovery spread beyond academic circles, the monument began attracting attention from around the world. Divers travelled from every continent to see it for themselves. Television documentaries were made, books were written. The monument became a pilgrimage site for those who believed it represented evidence of lost civilizations, and a curiosity for those who simply wanted to see one of the ocean's most unusual formations. But despite decades of investigation, despite thousands of dives and countless hours of analysis, the fundamental questions about the Yonaguni monument remain unanswered. The structure sits there, in the blue water off Japan's coast, as enigmatic today as it was on that March morning in 1986, when Kihachiro Aratake first laid eyes on it. The precision of its angles seems too perfect to be natural. The regularity of its terraced levels appears too systematic to be coincidental. The apparent tool marks and quarry scars suggest human intervention. Yet the implications of accepting it as man-made are staggering. It would mean that 12,000 years ago, when most of the world was emerging from the Ice Age, someone in this remote corner of the Pacific possessed architectural and engineering capabilities that we assumed did not exist. Newgrange. 5,200 years ago, the world was a vastly different place. The Great Pyramids of Egypt had not yet been imagined. Stonehenge was still 15 centuries in the future. In most parts of Europe, people lived in small, scattered communities, still learning the basics of farming after thousands of years as hunter-gatherers. They made tools from stone, bone, and wood. They had no writing systems, no wheeled vehicles, no metal tools of any kind. Their knowledge of mathematics and astronomy was limited to what they could observe with the naked eye and remember through oral tradition. Yet in the fertile valley of the River Boyne in Ireland, these supposedly simple Stone Age farmers were about to accomplish something that would challenge everything we think we know about their capabilities. They were going to build one of the most sophisticated astronomical instruments ever created, disguised as a tomb that would outlast civilizations that had not yet been born. The people who lived in the Boyne Valley around 3200 BCE were part of what archaeologists call the Neolithic period, the New Stone Age. They had recently made the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture, growing wheat and barley, raising cattle and sheep. Their society was becoming more complex, with evidence suggesting the emergence of social hierarchies and specialized roles. But they were still supposed to be primitive by the standards of later civilizations. They had no cities, no monumental architecture, no written records. What they did have was an unprecedented understanding of the movements of the sun and stars, and an inexplicable ability to translate that knowledge into stone and earth on a scale that would not be matched in Northern Europe for thousands of years. The monument they built, which we now call Newgrange, required the transport and careful placement of over 200,000 tons of stone. The main structure is a massive circular mound, 85 metres in diameter and 13 metres high, built from layers of alternating stone and turf that create a waterproof barrier that has kept the interior dry for over 5 millennia. But the engineering marvel goes far beyond simple construction. The builders quarried massive stones from locations many kilometres away and somehow transported them to the site without wheeled vehicles or draft animals. They carved intricate spiral patterns into dozens of these stones before positioning them around the monument's perimeter. They constructed a 19-metre-long passage that leads to a cruciform chamber at the heart of the mound, using a technique called corbelling to create a roof that has never leaked and shows no signs of structural stress after 50 centuries. But the most remarkable achievement was not the engineering, but the astronomy. The entire monument was designed around a single moment that occurs only once each year. On the morning of the winter solstice, and for just a few days before and after, the rising sun shines through a specially constructed opening above the entrance called a roof box. This beam of sunlight travels down the length of the passage and illuminates the back wall of the inner chamber for exactly 17 minutes. This was no accident. The precision required to achieve this effect demanded detailed knowledge of the sun's annual cycle, sophisticated mathematical calculations to determine the exact angles needed, and engineering skills to implement the design flawlessly. The roof box had to be positioned at precisely the right height and angle. The passage had to be oriented to within a fraction of a degree. The chamber had to be designed so that the light would reach exactly the right spot at exactly the right time. Consider what this means. These Stone Age farmers possessed a level of astronomical knowledge that we typically associate with much later civilizations. They understood that the sun follows a predictable annual pattern, that the winter solstice marks the shortest day of the year, and that this moment could be used as the basis for a sophisticated calendar system. They had observed the sky with such precision that they could predict exactly where the sun would rise on any given day of the year. More importantly, they had the organizational capabilities to coordinate the labor of hundreds of people over multiple generations. Modern estimates suggest that Newgrange took between 20 and 30 years to complete, requiring a workforce of 300 people working continuously. This was not a simple farming community throwing up a basic shelter. This was a complex society with specialized knowledge, centralized planning, and the economic surplus necessary to support massive public works projects. The sophistication extends beyond the solstice alignment. Recent research has identified additional astronomical features built into the monument. The passage may also be aligned with certain phases of the moon's 18-year cycle. Some of the carved symbols on the stones appear to represent lunar calendars or astronomical observations. The positioning of other monuments in the Boyne Valley suggests that the entire complex was designed as an integrated astronomical observatory and ceremonial centre. This forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about Neolithic society in Ireland and throughout Europe. These were not the simple farmers that traditional archaeology portrayed. They were sophisticated observers of the natural world, skilled engineers, talented artists, and complex social organisers. They possessed mathematical knowledge that allowed them to translate abstract astronomical concepts into precisely positioned stone monuments. The implications ripple outward from that single monument in the Irish countryside. If farmers in Ireland could achieve this level of sophistication in 3200 BCE, what were their contemporaries accomplishing elsewhere? How much knowledge has been lost because it was never written down? How many other monuments around the world contain astronomical alignments or engineering techniques that we have not yet recognised or understood? Newgrange stands as proof that human intelligence and curiosity have remained constant throughout history. The people who built it possessed the same cognitive capabilities as modern humans, the same drive to understand their place in the cosmos, the same ability to organise complex projects and solve difficult problems. What they lacked was not intelligence, but the accumulated knowledge and technology that later civilizations would build upon their achievements. The monument challenges our linear view of human progress, the assumption that each generation was necessarily less sophisticated than those that followed. Instead, it suggests that human societies have always been capable of remarkable achievements when the right combination of knowledge, organisation, and motivation came together. Bimini Road. The year was 1933, and Edgar Cayce was deep in one of his famous trances. Known as the Sleeping Prophet, Cayce claimed he could peer into the past and future while unconscious, delivering detailed readings about everything from medical diagnoses to lost civilizations. On December 19th of that year, he made a startling prediction. Atlantis, he declared, would begin to rise again near the island of Bimini in the Bahamas sometime around 1968 or 1969. Evidence of this ancient civilization would be found beneath the waters, proving that the legendary lost continent had once existed in the Caribbean. For 35 years, Cayce's followers waited. They organised expeditions to the Bahamas, scoured the shallow waters around Bimini, and searched for any sign that might validate their prophet's vision. Most serious archaeologists dismissed the whole thing as fantasy. Atlantis was a philosophical allegory created by Plato, not a real place to be discovered with scuba gear and underwater cameras. Then, in September 1968, three men changed everything. Joseph Manson Valentine was a zoologist and honorary curator at the Miami Museum of Science. Jacques Mayol was a world-renowned freediver who would later inspire the movie The Big Blue. Robert Ngove was a pilot who had been flying over the Bahamas when he spotted something unusual beneath the crystal-clear waters. Together, they decided to investigate what Ungove had seen from the air. What they found 18 feet below the surface, just off the northwest coast of North Bimini, seemed to fulfill Casey's prophecy in spectacular fashion. Stretching across the ocean floor was a massive formation of rectangular limestone blocks, arranged in what appeared to be a deliberate pattern. The formation was roughly L-shaped, extending for about half a mile in a northeast-southwest direction. The blocks were enormous, some measuring 10 to 13 feet across, fitted together so precisely that divers could barely slip a knife blade between them. Valentine was stunned. This was not random debris or natural rock scatter. The blocks were arranged in distinct rows, creating what looked unmistakably like an ancient road or pathway beneath the waves. The precision of the arrangement, the uniform size of the stones, the deliberate geometric pattern, all suggested human construction on a massive scale. Here, just as Casey had predicted, was evidence of an advanced civilization that had once thrived in the Caribbean. Word of the discovery spread like wildfire through the alternative archaeology community. Here was proof, they claimed, that Atlantis was real. The blocks were clearly cut and placed by human hands, representing the remains of harbours, temples or roadways built by an advanced prehistoric civilization. The timing seemed miraculous, discovered just as Casey had foretold in the exact location he had specified. But as news of the find reached mainstream scientific circles, skepticism quickly emerged. Geologist Eugene Shin, working for the US Geological Survey, was among the first to examine the formation with a critical eye. What Valentine and his team were calling an ancient road, Shin argued, was nothing more than a natural geological formation known as beach rock. Beach rock, Shin explained, forms when sand, shell fragments, and other sediments become cemented together by calcium carbonate in shallow tropical waters. The process occurs naturally along beaches throughout the Caribbean, creating slabs of consolidated limestone that can appear remarkably uniform and artificial. When sea levels rise or the land subsides, these formations become submerged, creating underwater pavements that can look exactly like human-made structures. The debate became increasingly heated as both sides marshalled evidence for their positions. Proponents of the artificial origin theory pointed to features they claimed could only be the result of human engineering. They identified what appeared to be tool marks on some of the blocks, evidence of quarrying and cutting that natural processes could not explain. They noted the precise rectangular shapes of many stones, the careful arrangement in linear patterns, and the discovery of smaller stones that seemed to have been used as support props beneath the larger blocks. More intriguingly, they claimed to have found pillar bases and other structural elements near the main formation, suggesting that this was not just a road but part of a larger complex that once stood above the waves. Some researchers reported finding notches and grooves in the stones that appeared to be designed for fitting wooden beams or other structural elements, evidence of sophisticated construction techniques. But mainstream geologists remained unconvinced. They pointed out that beach rock formations naturally fracture along regular joint lines, creating the rectangular shapes that proponents claimed were evidence of cutting and shaping. The apparent tool marks could be explained by natural erosion processes, marine boring, and the action of waves and currents over thousands of years. The precise fit between blocks was simply the result of the rock breaking along natural weak points, like a giant jigsaw puzzle created by geological stress. More damaging to the artificial theory was the complete absence of any artifacts that should be associated with human construction. If this was indeed the remains of an ancient harbour or ceremonial complex, where were the pottery fragments, tools, anchors, or other debris that human activity always leaves behind? Despite decades of searching, not a single confirmed human artifact has been found in association with the Bimini Road. The geological evidence also seemed to support the natural formation theory. Core samples taken from the blocks showed that they were composed of beach rock typical of the region, formed by the same processes that create similar formations throughout the Bahamas. Radiocarbon dating of organic material within the rock suggested ages ranging from about 2,000 to 6,000 years, far too recent to represent the remnants of Atlantis or any other prehistoric civilization. Yet despite the scientific consensus that favours a natural origin, the mystery of Bimini Road refuses to disappear. The formation continues to attract researchers, divers and believers who insist that conventional geology cannot explain all of its features. They point to sections where the blocks appear to have been deliberately stacked, to areas where the formation seems to turn corners at precise right angles, to the overall layout that bears an uncanny resemblance to architectural planning. Recent underwater surveys using advanced sonar and imaging technology have revealed additional complexities to the formation. Some researchers claim to have identified walls, foundations, and other structural elements extending far beyond the main visible portion of the road. They argue that the formation is much larger and more complex than originally thought, representing not just a simple pathway, but the remains of an extensive underwater complex. The controversy has also expanded to encompass other underwater formations throughout the Bahamas. Researchers have identified similar stone arrangements near other islands, suggesting that if these are indeed artificial structures, they represent a widespread pattern of ancient construction throughout the region. Some have even claimed to identify underwater temples, harbours, and other architectural features that they believe are connected to the Bimini Road. But perhaps the most puzzling aspect of the entire controversy is not whether the formation is natural or artificial, but why it continues to generate such passionate debate more than 50 years after its discovery. The scientific evidence strongly favours a natural origin, yet the formation continues to challenge our assumptions about what ancient peoples were capable of achieving, and about what evidence we might expect to find if advanced prehistoric civilizations really did exist in the Caribbean. Plain of Jars. The world of 500 BCE was divided into stark contrasts. In the Mediterranean, Greek philosophers like Pythagoras were developing mathematical theories that would endure for millennia. The Persian Empire stretched from India to Egypt, connected by sophisticated road networks and administrative systems. In China, the iron plough was revolutionizing agriculture, allowing for population growth that would support massive construction projects like the Great Wall. But Southeast Asia was supposed to be different. This was a region where small tribal societies were just beginning to master ironworking, where most people lived in scattered agricultural communities along rivers and fertile valleys. The technology was basic, the social organisation simple, the monumental architecture non-existent. At least, that was what archaeologists believed until they began to seriously investigate the rolling hills of northern Laos. The Iron Age in Southeast Asia, spanning roughly from 500 BCE to 500 CE, was understood to be a period of gradual technological advancement. Communities were learning to smelt iron ore, to create tools and weapons that were superior to their bronze predecessors. They practiced rice agriculture in the valleys, raised water buffalo and pigs, and buried their dead with modest grave goods that reflected emerging social hierarchies. It was a time of steady progress, but nothing that suggested the organisational capabilities or technical expertise required for massive public works projects. Yet across the Sengkuang Plateau in northern Laos, scattered over more than 1,000 square kilometres, stands evidence that this understanding is fundamentally wrong. Over 2,000 massive stone jars carved from solid sandstone, conglomerate, and granite dot the landscape in clusters that range from a single jar to groups of nearly 400. These are not simple pottery vessels or modest burial containers. They are megalithic monuments that required levels of planning, organisation, and technical skill that should not have existed in Iron Age Southeast Asia. The jars themselves are extraordinary achievements of stone carving. The largest, known as the King's Jar at Site 1, weighs an estimated 10 tons and stands over 2 metres tall. Most jars range from 1 to 3 metres in height, with internal capacities measured in thousands of litres. They were carved from single blocks of stone, hollowed out with tools that left surprisingly smooth interior surfaces. Many feature carved rims, decorative elements, and what appear to be drainage holes that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of both form and function. But the technical challenges begin with the stone itself. Recent geological analysis has determined that many of the jars were not carved from local stone. The jars at Site 1, for example, were transported from a quarry located at least 8 kilometres away across mountainous terrain. This means that Iron Age communities in Laos were not only capable of carving massive stone objects, but also of moving them across difficult landscape using technology that archaeologists assumed they did not possess. Consider what this transportation would have required. A 10-ton stone jar cannot be moved by a few people working together. It requires organised teams of hundreds of workers, sophisticated knowledge of leverage and mechanics, and probably purpose-built roads or pathways to allow the massive stones to be rolled or dragged to their final locations. The logistics alone suggest a level of social organisation that contradicts everything we thought we knew about Iron Age Southeast Asian societies. The carving process would have been equally demanding. Experimental archaeology conducted by researchers attempting to recreate the jars has revealed the enormous investment of time and labour required. Even using modern steel tools, carving a single jar of moderate size requires hundreds of hours of work by skilled craftsmen. The Iron Age carvers were working with bronze and iron tools that were far less efficient than modern equivalents, meaning that each jar represented months or even years of sustained effort by specialised workers. This raises profound questions about the society that created these monuments. Who was supporting these craftsmen while they spent months carving a single jar? How was the enormous labour force organised and fed during the transportation and placement of these megaliths? What kind of political or religious authority could coordinate such massive undertakings across such a wide geographic area? The distribution of the jars adds another layer of complexity. They are not concentrated in a single location or organised around obvious geographic features. Instead, they are scattered across the plateau in a pattern that suggests careful planning and territorial organisation. Some sites contain hundreds of jars arranged in clear geometric patterns. Others consist of just a few vessels placed in locations that command views over the surrounding landscape. The overall distribution suggests a complex cultural landscape that was organised according to principles we do not yet understand. Recent excavations have begun to reveal that the jars were indeed used for burial purposes, but not in the way archaeologists initially expected. Rather than primary burials where bodies were placed directly into the jars, the evidence suggests a complex mortuary process involving secondary burial. Bodies were apparently processed elsewhere, then selected remains were placed in the jars along with grave goods that included bronze jewellery, iron tools, glass beads, and other objects that demonstrate extensive trade networks reaching across Southeast Asia. The grave goods themselves challenge assumptions about Iron Age technology and trade. Some of the glass beads found in the jars were manufactured in India or even the Mediterranean, indicating that these supposedly isolated communities were connected to trade networks that spanned continents. Bronze objects show sophisticated metallurgy and artistic techniques. The variety and quality of artifacts suggest that the jar builders were not primitive farmers, but members of a complex society with access to luxury goods and advanced technologies. Perhaps most significantly, the scale and duration of the jar building tradition suggests sustained cultural continuity over centuries. Radiocarbon dating indicates that jars were being created and used from at least 500 BCE to 500 CE, and possibly as late as 800 CE. This represents a 1,000-year tradition of megalithic construction that required the transmission of specialised knowledge across dozens of generations. The consistency of style and technique across this enormous timespan indicates stable social institutions and cultural practices that could maintain complex traditions over centuries. The 290-million-year-old human footprint. According to believers in lost civilizations and forbidden archaeology, humanity is far older than mainstream science admits. They claim that modern humans have walked the earth not for hundreds of thousands of years, but for hundreds of millions of years. The evidence, they say, is literally written in stone across sites around the world where human artifacts and fossils appear in rock layers that predate the supposed emergence of our species by unimaginable spans of time. The most spectacular example of this forbidden evidence, they argue, was discovered in the desert mountains of New Mexico in 1987, when a paleontologist uncovered what appeared to be a perfect human footprint embedded in rock that was 290 million years old. The man who made this earth-shattering discovery was Jerry McDonald, a paleontological field researcher who had been excavating fossil trackways in the Robledo Mountains of southern New Mexico. McDonald was not looking for human remains. He was documenting the rich collection of Permian period trackways that preserve the footprints of ancient amphibians, early reptiles, and primitive arthropods that lived when the region was a muddy coastal plain beside a vast inland sea. But among the countless tracks of these long-extinct creatures, MacDonald claimed to have found something that should not exist. Preserved in the same rock layers, he identified what appeared to be the footprint of a barefoot human being. The print showed clear anatomical details: 5 toes, an arch, a heel, proportions that matched a modern human foot. It was not a vague depression or a natural formation that might resemble a footprint. According to MacDonald, this was an unmistakable human track, complete with pressure ridges and toe impressions that could only have been made by someone walking across soft mud 290 million years ago. The implications were staggering. If this footprint were genuine, it would rewrite everything science thought it knew about the history of life on Earth. But to understand just how impossible this claim really is, we need to understand what the world looked like 290 million years ago, and what creatures were actually capable of making footprints during the Permian period. 290 million years ago, the Earth was a planet that no human could possibly survive on. The continents were massed together in the supercontinent of Pangaea, creating vast desert interiors and extreme climate conditions. The atmosphere contained different levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide than today. Most importantly, the most advanced life forms on land were early reptiles and amphibians that bore no resemblance to mammals, let alone humans. The first mammals would not evolve for another 60 million years during the Triassic period. The first primates would not appear until 55 million years ago. The human evolutionary line split from other apes only about 7 million years ago. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, emerged a mere 300,000 years ago. The entire span of human existence represents less than 0.1% of the time that has passed since the alleged footprint was made. To put this in perspective, imagine compressing all of Earth's history into a single year. The Permian period would occur in mid-November. The first mammals would appear in early December. The first primates would show up on December 29th. Modern humans would not appear until 11:48 p.m. on December 31st. The alleged human footprint in New Mexico would predate the entire mammalian class by the equivalent of 3 weeks on this compressed timeline. But the controversy surrounding MacDonald's discovery goes deeper than simple chronological impossibility. When examined closely, the evidence for this alleged human footprint becomes increasingly questionable. No peer-reviewed scientific papers have been published documenting the find. No detailed photographs or casts of the supposed footprint have been made available for independent analysis. Most tellingly, no other researchers have been able to locate or verify the existence of this footprint in MacDonald's extensive collection of trackway specimens. MacDonald did make legitimate and important contributions to paleontology through his work in the Robledo Mountains. His discoveries of Permian trackways are housed in the New Mexico Museum of Natural History and represent some of the most significant fossil trackway sites in North America. The problem is that among his thousands of documented specimens, there is no confirmed human footprint. The alleged discovery exists primarily in internet articles and alternative archaeology websites, not in museum collections or scientific journals. This pattern of unverifiable claims is common in the world of forbidden archaeology. Spectacular discoveries are announced that would revolutionize our understanding of human history, but when scientists attempt to examine the evidence, it proves to be unavailable, misidentified, or simply non-existent. The 290 million-year-old footprint follows this familiar template, an extraordinary claim that challenges established science, supported by minimal documentation and no independent verification. Yet the persistence of such claims reveals something important about human psychology and our relationship with deep time. The idea that humans might be far older than science suggests appeals to something fundamental in our nature. It makes us feel more significant, more enduring, more connected to the ancient past. It suggests that our species has survived cataclysms and mass extinctions that wiped out countless other life forms. The real trackways that MacDonald documented in the Robledo Mountains tell a different but equally fascinating story. They preserve a moment in time when early four-legged vertebrates were learning to live fully on land, when the first reptiles were developing adaptations that would eventually lead to dinosaurs, mammals, and ultimately to humans. These ancient footprints show us the actual path that evolution took to reach our modern world, a path that required nearly 300 million years of gradual change and adaptation. The genuine mystery is not whether humans walked the Earth during the Permian period, but how creatures that lived so long ago managed to leave such detailed records of their existence. The trackways represent moments of perfect preservation, when animals walked across mudflats at exactly the right time, when conditions were ideal for fossilization, when geological processes buried and protected these fragile impressions for hundreds of millions of years. But perhaps the most profound question raised by claims like the 290-million-year-old footprint is what they reveal about our desire to find evidence of human antiquity in the geological record. Why are we so drawn to the idea that our species might have ancient origins that science has overlooked? What does it mean that people are willing to believe in human footprints from the Permian period, while rejecting the vast body of evidence that documents our actual evolutionary history? Roman dodecahedron. The facts are deceptively simple. Starting in the 18th century, archaeologists across northern Europe began uncovering small bronze objects of extraordinary craftsmanship and puzzling design. These artifacts were roughly the size of a softball, cast from copper alloy and shaped into perfect dodecahedrons, 12-sided geometric forms with pentagonal faces. Each face contained a circular hole of varying diameter, ranging from small openings barely large enough for a pencil to larger apertures that could accommodate a thumb. Small knobs protruded from each vertex, giving the objects a distinctive spiky appearance. By today's count, approximately 130 of these objects have been discovered across what was once the northwestern frontier of the Roman Empire. They appear in Belgium, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Austria, Hungary, Luxembourg, and Britain. They date consistently to the 2nd through 4th centuries CE, the height of Roman power in these regions. Most have been found in Roman military camps, bathhouses, temples, and burial sites. Some were discovered alongside coins, pottery, and other everyday Roman artifacts. Others emerged from graves, suggesting they held special significance for their owners. What makes these objects so mysterious is not their construction, which represents sophisticated but well-understood Roman metalworking techniques, but their complete absence from Roman written records. The Romans were meticulous record keepers who documented everything from military procedures to cooking recipes. They wrote detailed manuals on engineering, agriculture, medicine, and religious practices. Yet nowhere in the vast corpus of Latin literature is there any mention of these distinctive 12-sided objects or their intended purpose. This silence in the written record launched what has become one of archaeology's most persistent detective stories. When scientists began studying the dodecahedron in detail, they quickly realized they were examining objects that had been carefully designed for some specific function. The varying hole sizes were not random, but followed deliberate patterns. The overall geometry was too precise to be decorative. The quality of craftsmanship suggested these were valuable, specialized tools rather than simple ornaments or toys. The first theory to gain serious attention proposed that the dodecahedra were surveying instruments used by Roman engineers and military personnel. Supporters of this theory pointed out that Roman armies required accurate methods for measuring distances and angles when constructing camps, roads, and fortifications. The graduated hole sizes could serve as a standardized measuring system, allowing surveyors to calculate distances by sighting through holes of known diameter at objects of known size. Experimental tests of this theory yielded mixed results. Modern researchers found that the dodecahedra could indeed function as range-finding devices under certain circumstances. By looking through holes of different sizes at a standard-sized object, an experienced user could estimate distance with reasonable accuracy. However, the Romans already possessed more sophisticated surveying instruments, including the groma for measuring right angles and various types of theodolites for more complex calculations. Why would they need an additional, more cumbersome tool for basic distance measurements? The astronomical theory emerged as researchers noted that many dodecahedra had been discovered at sites with known astronomical significance. Proponents suggested that the objects were used to measure the angle of sunlight or the position of celestial bodies. The 12 faces could correspond to the 12 months of the year, while the varying hole sizes might be calibrated to track the sun's position at different seasons and latitudes. This theory gained credibility when researchers demonstrated that dodecahedra could indeed function as simple astronomical instruments. By holding the object at arm's length and observing shadows cast through the holes, users could determine the sun's elevation angle with surprising precision. Some researchers claim to have identified specific dodecahedra that were calibrated for the latitude of their discovery sites, suggesting they were custom-made astronomical tools for local conditions. However, the astronomical theory also faced significant challenges. Roman astronomers already possessed sophisticated instruments for celestial observations, including astrolabes, armillary spheres, and sundials of various designs. The dodecahedra would have been far less accurate than these established tools, and their small size would have limited their usefulness for serious astronomical work. More recently, the knitting theory has gained attention among researchers and craftspeople alike. This proposal suggests that the dodecahedra were tools for creating knitted gloves or other tubular textiles. The varying hole sizes would allow for different yarn weights, while the overall shape would provide a stable platform for working multiple yarn strands simultaneously. Experimental archaeologists have successfully demonstrated that dodecahedra can function as knitting tools, producing gloves and other garments that match textile fragments found at Roman sites. The wear patterns on some ancient dodecahedra also appear consistent with repeated textile work. Moreover, this theory would explain why the objects are absent from military and engineering manuals. Textile work was typically women's work in Roman society and might not have been considered worthy of formal documentation. Yet even the knitting theory has its limitations. Not all dodecahedra show the wear patterns expected from regular textile use. Some examples are too small or have hole configurations that would be impractical for knitting. The high quality of bronze construction also seems excessive for what would essentially be household tools. Religious and ceremonial theories have also been proposed, based on the discovery of dodecahedra in temple contexts and burial sites. Some researchers suggest they were used in divination practices, with the 12 faces corresponding to months, zodiac signs, or other symbolic systems. Others propose they were status symbols or ceremonial objects that demonstrated the owner's wealth or religious devotion. The geographic distribution of the finds has provided additional clues and complications. Almost all dodecahedra have been discovered in the Celtic regions of the Roman Empire, areas that were conquered relatively late and maintained distinct cultural traditions alongside Roman practices. This pattern suggests the objects might represent a fusion of Celtic and Roman technologies or beliefs, explaining why they are absent from Roman literature produced in the Mediterranean heartland. Recent discoveries continue to add new dimensions to the mystery. In 2023, archaeologists in Lincolnshire uncovered what experts called one of the finest examples ever found, remarkably well preserved and showing clear evidence of deliberate manufacture. In Belgium, metal detector enthusiasts have uncovered fragments that provide new insights into construction techniques while raising fresh questions about their distribution and use. Despite more than 2 centuries of investigation, the Roman dodecahedron remains stubbornly enigmatic. Each theory that emerges can explain some aspects of these mysterious objects while failing to account for others. The surveying theory explains their presence in military contexts, but not their elaborate construction. The astronomical theory accounts for their geometric precision, but not their absence from Roman scientific texts. The knitting theory explains the varying hole sizes, but not the high-quality bronze construction. Puma Punku. By all reasonable expectations, the remains of a civilization that flourished between 300 and 1000 CE in the high Andes should tell a familiar story. We should find the typical artifacts of a pre-industrial society: pottery made by hand, tools crafted from stone and bronze, buildings constructed with locally available materials using simple techniques passed down through generations. The people of this era had no written language, no knowledge of the wheel, no iron tools, and no advanced mathematical concepts beyond basic arithmetic needed for trade and agriculture. Instead, scattered across a windswept plateau nearly 4 kilometers above sea level in Bolivia, lie stone blocks that seem to mock everything we think we know about ancient technology. The site, called Puma Punku, part of the larger Tiwanaku complex, contains megalithic stones carved with a precision that rivals modern manufacturing capabilities. These are not rough-hewn blocks roughly fitted together. They are engineered components, cut to tolerances measured in millimeters, designed to interlock in complex 3-dimensional puzzles that would challenge contemporary architects. The Tiwanaku civilization emerged on the Altiplano, the high plateau surrounding Lake Titicaca, sometime around 300 CE. This was a harsh environment that tested human ingenuity at every turn. The altitude made breathing difficult and agriculture challenging. Freezing temperatures occurred regularly throughout the year. The growing season was short and crops had to be specially adapted to survive the extreme conditions. Yet despite these obstacles, the Tiwanaku people managed to create one of the most sophisticated civilizations in pre-Columbian South America. Archaeological evidence suggests that Tiwanaku society was organized around intensive agriculture, long-distance trade, and religious ceremonies centered on their impressive stone monuments. They developed raised field systems that allowed them to grow crops efficiently in the challenging highland environment. They established trade networks that brought tropical products from the Amazon basin and marine resources from the Pacific coast. Their population at the height of their power may have reached 20,000 people, making Tiwanaku one of the largest urban centers in the ancient Americas. But the technological capabilities implied by their surviving monuments tell a different story entirely. The H-blocks at Puma Punku, carved from red sandstone and andesite, display engineering precision that seems impossible for their supposed time period and technical capabilities. These massive stones, some weighing over 100 tons, feature complex interlocking joints, perfectly flat surfaces, and internal channels cut with mathematical precision. The tolerances are so tight that even today, a knife blade cannot be inserted between the fitted blocks. Consider what this level of precision would require. The surfaces of these blocks are flat to within fractions of a millimetre across spans of several metres. The angles are cut to precise degrees, creating joints that fit together with mechanical precision. Internal channels and grooves are carved in perfectly straight lines, with smooth, uniform surfaces. Even the corners maintain sharp, clean edges without the chipping or irregularities that typically result from stone carving with primitive tools. Modern stone masons who have studied these blocks report that achieving similar precision today would require diamond-tipped power tools, laser measuring devices, and computer-controlled cutting equipment. The idea that Bronze Age people accomplished this with copper chisels, stone hammers, and string lines defies credibility. Yet according to established archaeological chronology, this is exactly what must have happened. The Tiwanaku people were working with the technology of their time, which consisted primarily of stone, bone, wood, and copper tools. They had no iron implements, which would not appear in the Andes for several more centuries. They possessed no mechanical advantage beyond simple levers and ramps. Their mathematical knowledge was presumably limited to what was necessary for basic engineering and astronomical observations. Their measuring instruments would have been crude compared to modern standards. Yet the evidence of their achievements lies scattered across the Puma Punku site in the form of precisely engineered stone blocks that seem to have been manufactured rather than carved. The uniform dimensions, the mechanical precision of the joints, the sophisticated understanding of three-dimensional geometry, all suggest capabilities that far exceed what we know about pre-Columbian Andean technology. The blocks also display features that appear to be the result of advanced planning and standardization. Many of the H-blocks are nearly identical in their dimensions and joint configurations, as if they were mass-produced according to standardized specifications. This implies not only sophisticated manufacturing techniques, but also advanced planning and quality control processes that ensured consistency across multiple units. Some researchers have suggested that the blocks were created using some form of concrete or artificial stone technology, which would explain their precision and uniformity. Recent analysis has indeed found evidence that some Tiwanaku stones may have been cast rather than carved, using a type of geopolymer concrete that could achieve the observed precision without requiring advanced cutting tools. If true, this would represent a technological achievement that predates the supposed invention of concrete by several centuries. But even if the blocks were cast rather than carved, this would not diminish the technological mystery they represent. Creating uniform molds capable of producing blocks with such precision would still require advanced engineering knowledge and sophisticated manufacturing techniques. The chemical knowledge needed to develop effective geopolymer concrete formulations would represent a level of scientific understanding that seems unlikely for a Bronze Age civilization. The transportation and assembly of these massive blocks presents another technological puzzle. Many of the stones at Puma Punku were quarried from locations several kilometers away and somehow moved across difficult terrain to their final positions. Even today, moving 100-ton blocks would require specialized heavy equipment and careful planning. How the Tiwanaku people accomplished this with their supposed technology remains unexplained. The precision joint work also suggests the use of sophisticated lifting and positioning equipment during assembly. The blocks had to be positioned with millimeter accuracy to achieve the tight fits that are visible today. This would require not only powerful lifting devices, but also precise control mechanisms that could position massive stones with extraordinary accuracy. Perhaps most puzzling is the question of why such precision was necessary. the level of accuracy achieved in these blocks far exceeds what would be required for structural integrity or aesthetic purposes. It suggests that the builders were either following engineering principles that we do not understand, or they possessed manufacturing capabilities that made such precision routine rather than extraordinary. The technological paradox of Puma Punku extends beyond simple questions of how the blocks were made to deeper questions about the nature of technological development itself. If the Tiwanaku people possess such advanced capabilities, why did these technologies not spread to other regions, or persist beyond the collapse of their civilization? Why do we find no evidence of the tools and equipment that would have been necessary to create these monuments? Voynich manuscript. The summer of 1912 had been profitable for Wilfred Voynich, but not in the way he'd expected. The Polish-born antiquarian book dealer had established himself in London as a specialist in rare manuscripts and incunabula, building a reputation among collectors and scholars for his ability to locate extraordinary texts in unlikely places. His contacts throughout Europe regularly led him to monastery libraries, castle archives, and private collections where forgotten treasures might be gathering dust. But the invitation to visit Villa Mondragone, a Jesuit college in the hills outside Rome, promised nothing more than a routine business transaction. The Jesuits needed money. Their libraries were filled with manuscripts they could no longer properly maintain, and selling a few duplicate or less significant works seemed like a practical solution to their financial difficulties. Father Joseph Strickland, who had contacted Voynich about the potential sale, emphasized that the college had many interesting items, but nothing particularly extraordinary. It would be, Strickland suggested, a standard antiquarian book purchase, the kind of transaction Voynich had conducted hundreds of times before. Villa Mondragone itself was impressive, a Renaissance villa that had once served as a papal summer residence before being converted into a Jesuit educational institution. Its libraries contained the accumulated manuscripts of centuries, collected from suppressed religious houses, donated by wealthy patrons, and preserved through the dedication of generations of scholars. Most of the texts were exactly what Voynich expected. Theological treatises, classical works, medieval commentaries, and philosophical texts. Valuable certainly, but familiar in content and style. Voynich worked methodically through the offered manuscripts, evaluating their condition, rarity, and potential market value. His trained eye quickly assessed each item, categorizing them according to the interests of his various clients. Some would appeal to American university libraries building their medieval collections. Others might interest private collectors with specific scholarly passions. It was routine work that required expertise but offered few surprises. Then Father Strickland produced a chest that had been stored away from the main collection, almost forgotten in a corner of the archive. The manuscripts inside, Strickland explained, were problematic items that the library had never been able to properly catalogue or understand. Perhaps Voynich might find something of interest among these unusual texts, though he should not expect anything of great significance. As Voynich lifted the lid of the dusty chest, he had no idea that he was about to encounter what would become the most famous unreadable book in the world. Among the various manuscripts inside was a bound codex that immediately struck him as unlike anything he'd ever seen. The vellum pages were covered with text written in an elegant but completely unfamiliar script. More intriguing still were the illustrations that filled much of the manuscript, bizarre plants that resembled no known botanical species, astronomical diagrams that followed no recognizable celestial patterns, and most puzzling of all, detailed drawings of naked women bathing in green pools and elaborate tube systems. Voynich's first reaction was that he had discovered a work of tremendous scholarly importance. The manuscript appeared to be medieval, probably from the 15th century based on the vellum and ink. The script was systematic and consistent, suggesting it represented a real language rather than random marks or decorative elements. The illustrations were sophisticated and purposeful, clearly created by someone with considerable artistic skill and specific knowledge they were attempting to communicate. But as Voynich examined the manuscript more closely, his excitement began to mix with bafflement. The text was written in what appeared to be an unknown alphabet or cipher system. The words, if they were words, followed patterns that suggested linguistic structure, but the symbols bore no resemblance to any known writing system. Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Arabic, various medieval scripts. Voynich was familiar with all of them, But this was something entirely different. The botanical illustrations were equally mystifying. The plants depicted appeared to be real in the sense that they were drawn with careful attention to detail, showing roots, stems, leaves, flowers, and seed pods. But none of them matched any known species. They seemed to represent an entirely unknown flora, as if the manuscript had been created in some parallel world where different plants had evolved. The astronomical sections contained circular diagrams filled with symbols, star charts that showed unfamiliar constellations, and zodiacal figures that combined familiar elements with bizarre variations. Some pages showed what appeared to be biological or pharmaceutical information, with the strange plants connected to human figures through elaborate diagrams that suggested medicinal or alchemical processes. Most perplexing were the sections filled with drawings of naked women, some bathing in elaborate pools, others connected to the plant illustrations through systems of tubes and channels. The women were drawn with careful attention to anatomical detail, but they appeared to be participating in activities or rituals that made no obvious sense. Some seemed to be emerging from or merging with the plant forms, creating hybrid images that combined human and botanical elements in unsettling ways. Voynich purchased the manuscript along with several other items from the Jesuit collection, but his mind kept returning to the strange illustrated codex. During the journey back to London, he spent hours studying the pages, trying to identify any clues that might help him understand what he had found. The more he examined it, the more convinced he became that this was no mere curiosity or decorative item. The systematic nature of the script, the purposeful organisation of the content, the sophisticated execution of the illustrations, everything suggested that this manuscript contained serious information encoded in a way that had been lost to history. Back in his London shop, Voynich began reaching out to scholars and cryptographers who might help him understand his acquisition. He contacted linguists, medievalists, botanists, and astronomers, hoping that someone would recognise elements of the manuscript that could provide a starting point for interpretation. But every expert who examined the codex came away more puzzled than enlightened. The linguistic analysis revealed that the text appeared to follow natural language patterns in terms of word length, letter frequency, and syntactic structure. This suggested it was not simply a random cipher, but represented some form of meaningful communication. Yet no one could identify the underlying language or decode the script. The botanical illustrations were drawn with such precision that they seemed to represent real plants, but no botanist could identify the species depicted. The astronomical diagrams appeared to contain systematic information about celestial phenomena, but they did not correspond to any known astronomical traditions. As word of Voynich's discovery spread through scholarly circles, the manuscript began to attract attention from codebreakers and cryptographers around the world. The emerging field of cryptanalysis, stimulated by the military needs of World War I, brought new analytical techniques to bear on the mysterious text. Professional codebreakers who had successfully deciphered enemy communications found themselves completely stymied by the medieval manuscript. The mystery deepened as researchers discovered that the manuscript appeared to be organised into distinct sections, each focusing on different subject matter. There were sections that seemed to deal with botany, astronomy, biology, cosmology, and pharmaceutical or alchemical processes. The organisation suggested that this was not a random collection of strange images and text, but a systematic work of scholarship or instruction in some unknown field of knowledge. Over the decades that followed, the manuscript that came to bear Voynich's name would defeat every attempt at decipherment. Professional cryptographers, amateur enthusiasts, computer scientists, and artificial intelligence systems would all fail to crack its code. The text remains as unreadable today as it was on that summer day in 1912, when Voynich first lifted it from its dusty chest in the Italian villa. What had Voynich actually discovered in that forgotten corner of the Jesuit archive? Was it a work of medieval science encoded in a lost cipher system? A hoax created by some unknown forger? A document from a vanished civilization with knowledge that has been lost to history? Piri Reis map. Picture this. In 1929, a group of scholars working at the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul made a discovery that would shake the foundations of historical geography. Hidden among centuries-old manuscripts, they found fragments of a map that shouldn't exist. A map drawn in 1513 by Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis that appeared to show the coastline of Antarctica. 300 years before Antarctica was officially discovered, without ice. The theories that erupted from this finding read like science fiction. Ancient astronauts sharing their cosmic knowledge, lost civilizations with advanced technology, Ice Age survivors mapping the world before the Great Freeze, time travelers dropping hints across history, each claim more extraordinary than the last, each supporter more convinced they held the key to rewriting human history. But let's start with the wildest theory of all. In 1966, Professor Charles Hapgood published maps of the ancient sea kings, making an astounding claim. The Piri Reis map, he argued, was copied from source maps created by an unknown civilization during the last ice age, when Antarctica's coastline was free of ice. This wasn't just any civilization. According to Hapgood, they possessed technology capable of accurate longitude calculations and worldwide navigation skills that Europeans wouldn't master for centuries. Hapgood's theory caught fire in the 1960s counterculture movement. Here was proof, his supporters claimed, that mainstream history was completely wrong. Ancient peoples had been far more advanced than we imagined. Some took it further. Writer Erich von Däniken and others suggested these mysterious mapmakers weren't human at all, but extraterrestrial visitors who had surveyed Earth from orbit. The US Air Force seemed to validate these claims. In 1960, responding to Hapgood's inquiry, the Air Force's 8th Reconnaissance Technical Squadron wrote, "The lower part of the map shows the Princess Martha coast of Queen Maud Land, Antarctica, and the Palmer Peninsula are shown in a form which is remarkably similar to the results of the seismic profile made across the top of the ice cap by the Swedish-British Antarctic expedition of 1949. This letter became gospel for ancient mystery believers. If the US military said the map accurately showed Antarctica's ice-free coastline, who could argue? But the Air Force endorsement came with a crucial detail that believers often ignore. The letter was signed by Captain Lorenzo Burrows, who was responding as a courtesy, not conducting a scientific analysis. The Air Force wasn't claiming the map was accurate, just noting similarities that caught their attention in a brief examination. Real cartographers soon began picking apart Hapgood's claims. In 2000, cartographic historian Gregory McIntosh published a comprehensive analysis that demolished the Antarctica theory piece by piece. McIntosh found that the southern portion of the Piri Reis map doesn't show Antarctica at all. Instead, it depicts the South American coast, rotated and distorted in ways common to early 16th century mapping techniques. The ice-free Antarctica coastline that had excited so many researchers was actually a confused representation of Patagonia and the Tierra del Fuego region. Piri Reis himself had noted on the map that this southern land was based on Portuguese and Spanish sources, not mysterious ancient maps. The Admiral was quite clear about his sources in the detailed notes he included with the map. McIntosh's analysis revealed something else devastating to the ancient civilization theory. The map's accuracy claims were wildly exaggerated. While some coastal features of the Americas and Africa show reasonable precision for the period, others are completely wrong. The Caribbean islands are scattered randomly. The Amazon River flows from a massive lake that doesn't exist. North America is missing entirely. This pattern of mixed accuracy fits perfectly with what we know about early 16th century cartography. Mapmakers combined accurate information from recent explorations with older, less reliable sources and pure guesswork. The result was maps with pockets of precision surrounded by significant errors. But what about that Air Force letter that seemed to confirm the map's accuracy? Modern analysis shows the Antarctic coastline bears no resemblance to the Piri Reis map's southern features. The shapes don't match, the proportions are wrong, and the geographic relationships make no sense when compared to actual Antarctic topography. The longitude problem that Hapgood claimed proved ancient advanced technology also falls apart under scrutiny. The Piri Reis map uses a projection system common to Islamic cartography of the period. While some longitude calculations appear surprisingly accurate, this accuracy is selective and inconsistent, suggesting lucky guesses rather than systematic knowledge. Even the basic premise of the theory contains a fatal flaw. Antarctica wasn't completely ice-free during the last period, when humans could have mapped it. Parts of the continent have been covered by ice for millions of years, not the thousands that the ancient civilization theory requires. Piri Reis himself provides the most damning evidence against the mystery. In his own notes, he lists exactly where his information came from, Columbus's charts, Portuguese maps of the African coast, Arab geographical works, and various Mediterranean sources. He makes no mention of ancient maps or mysterious sources. He was simply doing what any competent cartographer of his era would do, combining the best available information from multiple sources. The Admiral's later works support this explanation. His 1528 world map and his maritime atlas Kitab-i-Bariyeh show the same mixture of accurate and inaccurate information, the same reliance on contemporary sources, and the same gradual improvement as better information became available. So why do the Antarctica theories persist? The 1929 discovery came at a time when Antarctica was still largely unexplored and mysterious. Early researchers looking at the map genuinely thought they saw similarities to the frozen continent. These initial impressions, combined with a natural human tendency to see patterns and connections, created a compelling mystery. The theories also tap into something deeper. The idea that ancient peoples possessed lost wisdom appeals to our sense that modern civilization has forgotten important truths. The possibility of advanced prehistoric technology offers an escape from the limitations of conventional history, but the evidence tells a different story. The Piri Reis map represents exactly what it appears to be, a remarkable achievement of 16th century Ottoman cartography, created by combining the best available European and Islamic sources of the time. It shows us not the remnants of a lost civilization, but the impressive scope of geographical knowledge that existed in 1513. The map remains historically significant without any connection to Antarctica. It preserves details of Columbus's voyages that exist nowhere else. It demonstrates the sophisticated map-making traditions of the Ottoman Empire. It shows how geographical knowledge spread between different cultures and civilizations in the age of exploration. London Hammer. On a summer day in 1936, Emma Hahn noticed something peculiar while walking with her husband Max along Red Creek near London, Texas. Protruding from a weathered chunk of limestone was what appeared to be a piece of decaying wood. The couple decided to take the odd rock home, where it sat for years before they finally broke it open with a hammer and chisel. What they discovered inside would challenge everything we think we know about the timeline of human civilization. Embedded within the solid rock was an iron hammer with a wooden handle. Not just any hammer, but one that looked remarkably similar to tools used by American pioneers in the 1800s. The head measured 6 inches long and just over an inch in diameter. The handle, partially fossilized, showed clear signs of having been worked by human hands. By all appearances, this was a typical 19th century mining or construction tool. But here's where the story takes an impossible turn. According to some researchers, the rock formation surrounding this hammer dates back between 100 to 400 million years. The Cretaceous period, the age of dinosaurs, a time when, according to mainstream science, humans wouldn't exist for another 99 million years. When the most advanced life forms on land were still figuring out how to grow feathers. If we accept the conventional timeline of human development, this hammer should not exist. Homo sapiens appeared roughly 300,000 years ago. Our ancestors didn't start making sophisticated metal tools until about 5,000 years ago. The idea of humans mining iron and crafting handled tools during the Cretaceous period doesn't just challenge our understanding of human evolution, it obliterates it completely. Think about what this would mean. While massive dinosaurs roamed the earth, while flowering plants were just beginning to appear, while mammals were tiny creatures scurrying in the shadows, humans would have already mastered metallurgy. They would have been extracting iron from ore, heating it to precise temperatures, and crafting tools with wooden handles. All of this happening 100 million years before we thought humans even existed. The implications stretch far beyond just human history. If people were making iron tools in the Cretaceous period, what happened to all the other evidence? Where are their cities, their pottery, their bones? How did an entire advanced civilization vanish so completely that only a single hammer remained? And how did that hammer end up perfectly preserved in solid rock for millions of years? Some researchers have suggested even more radical possibilities. Maybe this isn't evidence of ancient humans at all, but of time travelers who accidentally dropped modern tools in prehistoric times. Others propose that advanced extraterrestrial visitors left behind this artifact as proof of their presence on ancient Earth. A few have theorized that the hammer represents evidence of cyclical civilizations, where human society rises and falls over geological timescales. The Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas, where the hammer is now displayed, has made bold claims about its composition. They assert that the metal shows unusual purity levels impossible to achieve with modern smelting techniques. The iron, they claim, contains traces of chlorine and sulfur in concentrations that don't match any known natural iron deposits. This, they argue, suggests manufacturing techniques beyond current human capability. But when we examine these claims more closely, significant problems emerge. The museum has never allowed independent scientific analysis of the hammer's metal composition. No peer-reviewed studies have confirmed the unusual purity levels or the presence of chlorine and sulfur. Without proper scientific analysis, these assertions remain unverified claims rather than established facts. The geological dating of the surrounding rock presents even bigger challenges. The limestone concretion that contained the hammer isn't necessarily from the Cretaceous period at all. Limestone concretions can form relatively quickly under the right conditions. When mineral-rich water flows through sedimentary deposits, it can create hard limestone shells around objects in decades, rather than millions of years. This process, called concretion formation, is well understood by geologists. It requires specific chemical conditions where dissolved minerals precipitate out of groundwater and accumulate around foreign objects. The resulting limestone nodules can be extremely hard and dense, giving the appearance of ancient rock even when they formed recently. The location where the Hans found their hammer supports this explanation. Red Creek runs through an area rich in limestone deposits and underground springs. The region has a history of mining activity dating back to the late 1800s. It's entirely possible that a miner dropped or lost his hammer near the creek, and over the following decades, mineral-rich groundwater formed a limestone concretion around it. The wooden handle provides another clue to the hammer's true age. If this tool were actually millions of years old, the wood should have been completely fossilized or mineralized. Instead, parts of the handle remain as organic wood, suggesting an age measured in decades rather than geological epochs. The partial fossilization that has occurred is consistent with wood that's been exposed to mineral-rich groundwater for perhaps 50 to 100 years. Even the style of the hammer points to a much more recent origin. The design, proportions, and construction methods all match tools commonly used in American mining and construction during the late 1800s and early 1900s. Tool historians who have examined photographs of the hammer note that it shows typical characteristics of mass-produced hammers from that era. But perhaps the most telling evidence comes from the discovery itself. The Hans found this rock in an area that had been extensively disturbed by human activity. Mining, road construction, and farming had moved sediments and debris throughout the region for decades before 1936. The limestone concretion could easily have formed around a lost hammer and then been displaced by human activity, ending up in the creek bed where the couple discovered it. Still, questions remain that keep this artifact in the realm of genuine mystery. Why hasn't the Creation Evidence Museum allowed independent analysis that could definitively settle the hammer's age and composition? What specific geological processes create the concretion, and how long did they take? Are there other similar artifacts in the area that might provide additional clues? The London hammer represents a perfect example of how initial appearances can be deceiving, and how extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. While the hammer itself is real, and the limestone concretion that surrounded it is genuine, the most likely explanation doesn't involve time travel, ancient civilizations, or alien visitors. Instead, it demonstrates the power of natural processes to create formations that can mislead us about their true age and origin. It shows how our desire to find evidence of the impossible can lead us to see mysteries where more mundane explanations actually fit the facts better. The hammer also highlights the importance of proper scientific analysis in evaluating unusual discoveries. Without independent testing and peer review, claims about ancient artifacts remain just that, claims, no matter how compelling they might initially appear. What continues to puzzle researchers isn't whether humans lived alongside dinosaurs, but rather how quickly natural processes can create formations that appear ancient. How often do we mistake recent geological activity for evidence of deep time? And how many other artifacts might be misunderstood because we haven't fully grasped the speed at which certain rock formations can develop? Like Winnipesaukee Mystery Stone, the pickaxe struck something hard beneath the New Hampshire soil, sending a sharp vibration up through the wooden handle. Seneca Ladd's work crew had been digging post holes for a fence, near the shores of Lake Winnipesaukee in 1872 when they hit what they first assumed was just another rock. But as they cleared away the dirt, something unusual emerged from the earth. Dark, smooth, and perfectly egg-shaped, this wasn't your typical New England fieldstone. It was covered in strange markings that none of the workers could identify. What they had uncovered would become one of America's most enduring archaeological puzzles. The object measured roughly 4 inches long and 2.5 inches wide, carved from a dark, fine-grained stone. Its surface bore a collection of symbols unlike anything the men had ever seen. Geometric patterns, what appeared to be faces, strange designs that could be writing, could be art, or could be something else entirely. Seneca Ladd, the contractor overseeing the fence construction, recognized that this was no ordinary find. He carefully preserved the artifact, and it soon made its way into the hands of local historians and scholars who began the long process of trying to decode its secrets. The stone had been buried approximately 4 feet underground, with no other artifacts or evidence of human activity in the immediate area. The first systematic analysis came from Frances Calkins, a respected historian of the era. She examined the symbols carefully and proposed that they represented some form of Native American writing system. The markings, she suggested, might record an important treaty or agreement between local tribes. Her theory gained traction because several of the symbols did appear to resemble pictographs found in other indigenous art throughout New England. But as more experts examined the stone, competing theories emerged. Some scholars argued that the symbols showed influences from multiple cultures. They identified what appeared to be elements reminiscent of Celtic designs, others that looked similar to ancient Mediterranean scripts, and still others that seemed to match patterns found in Asian cultures. How could a single artifact contain such a diverse mix of influences? The geological analysis of the stone itself added another layer to the mystery. The material was identified as a type of clay ironstone, common to the New England region. This suggested local origin, but the precision of the carving and the sophistication of the symbols seemed to exceed what researchers expected from prehistoric inhabitants of the area. The stone had been shaped with remarkable skill, its egg-like form perfectly symmetrical, its surface polished to a smooth finish. As word of the discovery spread, more theories proliferated. Some researchers suggested the stone was evidence of pre-Columbian contact between North America and the Old World. They pointed to certain symbols that appeared to match ancient European or Asian scripts as proof that transoceanic voyages had occurred centuries before Columbus. Others proposed that the stone represented a form of ancient astronomical calendar, with the various symbols marking important celestial events. The most intriguing theory came from researchers who noticed that some of the symbols seemed to match hieroglyphic writing systems from ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. They suggested that the stone might be evidence of much earlier contact between ancient civilizations and the Americas than anyone had previously imagined. Could ancient seafarers have reached New Hampshire thousands of years ago, leaving behind this cryptic message? Yet each theory that emerged faced significant challenges when subjected to rigorous analysis. The supposed Celtic elements in the design didn't match authentic Celtic artwork when examined closely. The presumed Egyptian hieroglyphs bore only superficial resemblance to actual Egyptian writing. The astronomical calendar theory couldn't explain why the symbols didn't correspond to any known celestial patterns or cycles. Modern archaeological techniques have been applied to the stone, but they've raised as many questions as they've answered. Microscopic analysis of the carved surfaces shows tool marks consistent with metal implements, suggesting the carving was done after European contact with the Americas. This finding challenges theories that the stone represents prehistoric Native American work, as most indigenous peoples in the region didn't have access to metal tools before European arrival. Chemical analysis of the stone's composition confirmed it was local material, quarried somewhere in New England. But this finding contradicted theories about ancient seafarers bringing the stone from distant lands. If the material was local, then whoever created it had access to New England resources and was familiar with local geology. The discovery location has also been scrutinized by modern researchers. The area where Ladd's crew found the stone had been disturbed by previous construction and farming activities. This raised questions about whether the stone had originally been buried there or had been moved from another location by human activity over the decades since European settlement. carbon dating attempts have proven inconclusive because the stone contains no organic material suitable for dating. Without being able to establish when the stone was created, researchers can't determine whether it predates European contact or was made sometime after 1600. This fundamental uncertainty undermines many of the theories about its origin and purpose. The symbols themselves continue to defy translation. Despite more than a century of study, no researcher has successfully decoded the markings or identified a writing system that matches them completely. Some symbols appear to be representational, possibly depicting faces, animals, or objects. Others seem purely geometric or decorative. Still others might be letters or words in an unknown script. Recent digital analysis has revealed details invisible to earlier researchers. High-resolution imaging shows that some symbols were carved more deeply than others, suggesting they might have been added at different times. Some markings appear to have been recarved or modified after the original carving was completed. These observations suggest a complex creation process rather than a single carving session. Indigenous historians have offered their own interpretations of the stone. Some suggest that while the symbols don't match any known Native American writing system, they might represent a unique local tradition that was lost when European diseases decimated indigenous populations in New England. Others argue that the stone could be a much later creation, possibly made by Native Americans who had learned carving techniques from European settlers. The stone currently sits in a display case at the Museum of New Hampshire History in Concord, surrounded by mirrors that allow visitors to examine all its surfaces. Museum curators regularly field questions from visitors who are convinced they can identify some of the symbols, or who have theories about the stone's meaning. Amateur researchers continue to propose new interpretations, though none has gained acceptance among professional archaeologists. What makes this artifact particularly frustrating for researchers is its apparent sophistication combined with its cultural isolation. If the stone represents an advanced writing system or complex symbolic language, why hasn't similar work been found elsewhere in New England? If it's the product of contact between multiple cultures, why is it the only evidence of such contact found in the region? The Koso artifact. Sometimes the most extraordinary claims emerge from the most ordinary moments. On February 13, 1961, three friends were doing what rockhounds do best: hunting for minerals and geodes in the desert hills near Olancha, California. Wallace Lane, Virginia Maxey, and Jack Gifford had driven out to the Koso Mountains, a popular spot for finding interesting specimens. They were looking for rocks to cut and polish, maybe find some pretty crystals to add to their collections. What they brought home that day would challenge everything we think we know about ancient technology and human civilization. The trio found what appeared to be a typical geode about 6 inches in diameter, covered with fossil shells, and looking exactly like the kind of mineral formation common to the region. They estimated it to be around 500,000 years old based on the surrounding rock layers and fossil evidence. Now, when they got back home, Lane decided to cut the geode open with his diamond saw to see what crystals might be hiding inside. The blade hit something unexpected. Instead of revealing hollow chambers lined with quartz or amethyst, the geode contained something that should have been impossible. Embedded in the ancient rock was what looked unmistakably like a modern spark plug, complete with metal electrodes and ceramic insulator. According to conventional understanding of geological time, this was like finding a computer chip in a dinosaur fossil. If we accept that the surrounding rock formation truly was 500,000 years old, then we're looking at evidence that completely overturns our understanding of human technological development. 500,000 years ago, according to mainstream science, early hominids were just learning to use stone tools. The most advanced technology on Earth would have been sharpened sticks and crude hand axes. The idea that anyone could manufacture precision metal components and ceramic insulators is beyond revolutionary. It's impossible. But the spark plug was there, seemingly embedded in solid rock that had formed long before humans developed metallurgy, before they discovered electricity, before they even learned to make fire reliably. The implications were staggering. Either our timeline of human development was completely wrong, or something extraordinary had happened in the distant past that we had no record of. The discoverers were convinced they had found proof of ancient advanced technology. Word spread through the growing community of researchers interested in out-of-place artifacts. Here was physical evidence that prehistoric civilizations had achieved technological sophistication, matching or exceeding modern capabilities. Some suggested it proved the existence of lost advanced civilizations like Atlantis. Others proposed it was evidence of ancient astronaut visitation, with extraterrestrial beings leaving behind advanced technology. The artifact quickly became a cornerstone case for researchers challenging conventional archaeology and history. If a spark plug could survive embedded in 500,000-year-old rock, what other evidence of ancient technology might be waiting to be discovered? The Koso artifact, as it became known, appeared in numerous books and articles about mysterious archaeological discoveries. But the scientific investigation that followed revealed a much more complex and ultimately disappointing story. The first challenge came from geologists who examined the formation more carefully. The object wasn't actually embedded in a natural geode at all. Instead, it was encased in what's called a concretion, a hard mineral formation that can develop relatively quickly around foreign objects under the right chemical conditions. Concretions form when mineral-rich groundwater deposits layers of material around an object over time. Unlike geodes, which form in hollow spaces within rocks, concretions develop by accumulating material on surfaces. The process can happen in decades rather than millennia, especially in areas with high mineral content in the groundwater. The Koso Mountains region, with its history of mining activity and mineral-rich soil, provides ideal conditions for rapid concretion formation. The age estimate of 500,000 years was based on a misunderstanding of the geological processes involved. The fossil shells embedded in the concretion's outer surface were indeed ancient, but they had been picked up and incorporated during the concretion's formation. The shells themselves might be hundreds of thousands of years old, but their presence in the concretion didn't mean the concretion itself was ancient. In 1999, researchers Pierre Stromberg and Paul Heinrich conducted a detailed analysis of the artifact with help from spark plug collectors and automotive historians. Their investigation revealed that the object was indeed a spark plug, specifically a 1920s Champion model commonly used in Ford Model T and Model A engines. The identification was based on distinctive design features, including the hexagonal nut configuration and the specific thread pattern. The spark plug collectors were able to match the artifact to Champion spark plug advertisements and technical specifications from the 1920s. Even more telling, they identified specific manufacturing details that were unique to Champion plugs from that era, including the way the ceramic insulator was shaped and the particular metal alloys used in construction. But how did a 1920s spark plug end up encased in what appeared to be ancient rock? The answer lies in the area's industrial history. The Koso Mountains had been extensively mined for various minerals throughout the early 20th century. Mining operations required generators and other gas-powered equipment to operate pumps, lights and machinery in remote locations. A discarded or lost spark plug from mining equipment could easily have been covered by mineral-rich sediments and groundwater. The concretion formation process was accelerated by the specific chemistry of the mining area. Industrial runoff and disturbed mineral deposits created ideal conditions for rapid mineral deposition. What might normally take decades could happen in just a few years under these conditions. By the time Lane's group found the specimen in 1961, 40 years of mineral accumulation could have created a rock-hard casing that appeared ancient to casual inspection. X-ray analysis of the artifact supported this explanation. The internal structure showed the characteristic decay pattern of 1920s spark plug components exposed to groundwater and mineral deposition over several decades. The metal electrodes showed corrosion consistent with exposure to the specific chemical conditions found in old mining areas. The ceramic insulator also provided crucial evidence. Its composition matched exactly the materials used in 1920s Champion spark plugs, including specific clay mixtures and firing techniques that were unique to that manufacture and time period. Modern analysis could identify not just the general type of ceramic, but the specific manufacturing processes used to create it. Despite this overwhelming evidence, the Koso artifact continues to appear in books and websites about ancient mysteries. The original discoverers never accepted the spark plug identification, maintaining until their deaths that they had found evidence of prehistoric technology. Some researchers continue to argue that the scientific analysis was flawed, or that there's a conspiracy to suppress evidence of ancient advanced civilizations. The persistence of the mystery, despite clear scientific resolution, highlights how powerful first impressions can be and how difficult it is to change minds once extraordinary claims take hold. The image of a spark plug embedded in ancient rock captures the imagination in ways that mundane explanations about mining equipment and concretion formation cannot match. The Kensington runestone. The morning of November 8, 1898 started like any other for Swedish immigrant Olof Öhman. He was clearing trees on his farm near Kensington, Minnesota, working to expand his farmable land. When his axe struck a large poplar tree, something unusual happened. As the tree toppled, its roots pulled up a flat stone slab from beneath the soil. Öhman brushed away the dirt and found himself staring at something that would either rewrite American history or become one of the most successful archaeological hoaxes ever created. The stone was covered with strange markings that Öhman recognized as runes, the ancient writing system used by medieval Scandinavians. But these weren't just any runes, they told an incredible story that, if true, would prove that Vikings had reached the heart of North America 130 years before Columbus ever set foot in the New World. According to the most outrageous interpretation of the stone's inscription, it was carved by 30 Scandinavian explorers who had journeyed from Vinland, the Norse settlement on the North American coast, deep into the continental interior. The message read, 8 Goths and 22 Norwegians on exploration journey from Vinland over the west. We had camped by 2 skerries one day's journey north from this stone. We were unfished one day. After we came home, found 10 men red with blood and dead. Ave Virgo Maria, save from evil. The date carved into the stone was even more explosive, 1362. This suggested that not only had Vikings established permanent settlements in North America, but they were actively exploring the continent's interior more than a century before Columbus. The implications were staggering. It meant that Scandinavian explorers had travelled thousands of miles inland, navigating river systems and establishing camps throughout what would become the American Midwest. Some supporters went even further, suggesting the stone proved extensive Viking colonization of North America. They argued that the explorers mentioned in the inscription were part of a larger network of Norse settlements stretching from Greenland to Minnesota. This theory painted a picture of thriving Scandinavian communities that had somehow vanished without leaving any other trace in the archaeological record. The stone quickly attracted attention from scholars and amateur historians alike. Some saw it as vindication of theories about pre-Columbian European contact with America. Others viewed it as proof that the Norse sagas describing Vinland were more historically accurate than previously believed. The discovery seemed to fill a crucial gap in the historical record, providing physical evidence for Viking presence in North America beyond the brief mentions in medieval texts. But as linguists and runologists began examining the inscription more carefully, serious problems emerged. The runic characters on the stone didn't match authentic medieval Scandinavian writing. Many of the runes used forms that didn't exist until the 19th century, long after the supposed 1362 date. The stone contained pentadic runes, a numbering system that wasn't developed until the 16th century. Most damaging of all, several runes were exactly like those found in a late 19th century runic alphabet book that was widely available in Scandinavian immigrant communities. The language itself presented even bigger problems. The inscription used grammatical constructions and vocabulary that were distinctly modern, not medieval. Phrases like exploration journey reflected 19th century terminology rather than 14th century usage. The word choices and sentence structure matched the dialect of Swedish and Norwegian immigrants living in Minnesota in the 1890s, not the language patterns of medieval Scandinavians. Geological analysis dealt another blow to the stone's authenticity. If the inscription had been carved in 1362, weathering patterns should have shown centuries of erosion and lichen growth. Instead, the carved surfaces appeared fresh, with tool marks consistent with recent carving using modern implements. The weathering that was present matched what would be expected from a few years of exposure, not over 5 centuries. The discovery circumstances also raised red flags. Öhman claimed the stone was found tangled in the roots of a tree that was at least 40 years old, but the tree's actual age was later determined to be much younger. Local residents who knew the area well had never seen the stone before Öhman's discovery, despite the location being well-travelled farmland that had been cultivated for years. investigation into Oman's background revealed that he was well educated and had access to runic reference materials. He owned books on Scandinavian history and had participated in local historical societies that discussed Norse exploration theories. He certainly had both the knowledge and the tools necessary to create the inscription. More tellingly, when first questioned about the stone, Oman showed suspiciously detailed knowledge about runic writing for a simple farmer. The hoax theory gained further support when researchers examined the cultural context of the discovery. The late 1800s saw intense interest in proving Scandinavian contributions to American history. Swedish and Norwegian immigrants faced discrimination and were eager to establish their heritage's legitimacy in their new homeland. A discovery proving that Scandinavians had reached America first would have enormous cultural and political value for these communities. Several local residents came forward years later with accounts suggesting they had seen Oman working on a stone carving project in his workshop. While these testimonies came long after the initial discovery and can't be verified, they fit the pattern of evidence pointing toward modern creation of the artifact. Despite overwhelming evidence against its authenticity, the Kensington runestone continues to have devoted supporters. They argue that the linguistic analysis is flawed, that the geological evidence has been misinterpreted, and that there's a scholarly conspiracy to suppress proof of pre-Columbian Scandinavian exploration. Some propose that even if Oman carved the stone, he might have been copying from a genuine medieval original that has since been lost. Modern DNA studies of the area's population have found no evidence of pre-Columbian Scandinavian genetic markers. Archaeological surveys of the region have failed to turn up any artifacts, structures, or other evidence that would support the presence of medieval Norse explorers. The complete absence of corroborating evidence in an area that should contain abundant traces of long-term Scandinavian presence remains one of the most compelling arguments against the stone's authenticity. The Aiud wedge. Workers at a construction site near Aiud, Romania in 1974 were digging through riverbank sediments when they made 3 discoveries that would forever change how we view archaeological timelines. 10 meters below the surface, buried in what appeared to be undisturbed Pleistocene-era deposits, they found 2 mastodon teeth and a mysterious aluminum object. The teeth were exactly what geologists expected to find in sedimentary layers dating back 250,000 years. The aluminum wedge, however, should not have existed anywhere on Earth at that time. According to our understanding of technological development, aluminum in 1974 was one of humanity's most recent industrial achievements. Pure aluminum wasn't isolated until 1825, and commercial aluminum production didn't begin until the 1880s. Before that, aluminum was rarer and more valuable than gold, so difficult to extract from its ore that Napoleon III served his most honoured guests with aluminum utensils, while lesser dignitaries had to make do with mere gold plates. But here was a wedge-shaped piece of aluminum, seemingly manufactured with precise angles and smooth surfaces, buried alongside extinct mammoth remains in deposits that predated human civilization by hundreds of thousands of years. The object measured approximately 8 inches long, 5 inches wide, and 3 inches thick, with a distinctive wedge shape that suggested deliberate manufacturing rather than natural formation. If this aluminum artifact truly belonged to the Pleistocene era, it would mean that someone or something had mastered advanced metallurgy when the most sophisticated human tools were hand-shaped stones. The implications stretched far beyond simple technological advancement. It suggested that either our timeline of human development was catastrophically wrong, or that non-human intelligence had visited Earth and left behind evidence of their presence. The artifact's chemical composition only deepened the mystery. Laboratory analysis revealed that the aluminum wasn't pure, but contained traces of copper, silicon, zinc, and other elements in precise ratios. This alloy composition indicated sophisticated metallurgical knowledge, the kind of precise chemical control that requires advanced understanding of materials science. The ratios weren't random, but appeared deliberately calculated to produce specific properties. Even more puzzling was the object's surface oxidation. The wedge bore a thick patina that suggested extreme age, far older than any known human aluminum artifact. The oxidation patterns showed characteristics that researchers claimed were consistent with exposure to atmospheric conditions over geological time periods, not the decades that would be expected from modern aluminum objects. Some researchers proposed that the wedge represented evidence of ancient astronaut visitation. They argued that extraterrestrial beings had visited Earth during the Pleistocene and lost or discarded technological artifacts. The precise manufacturing and advanced alloy composition, they claimed, exceeded anything human civilizations could have produced even today. The wedge's aerodynamic shape led some to suggest it was part of an alien spacecraft's landing gear or support structure. Others theorized that the artifact proved the existence of lost advanced human civilizations. According to this theory, technologically sophisticated societies had risen and fallen during the Ice Ages, leaving behind only scattered evidence of their achievements. The aluminum wedge represented a fragment of this vanished civilization's industrial capacity, somehow preserved in the geological record while all other traces disappeared. The most radical interpretation suggested that the wedge was evidence of time travel or interdimensional contact. Proponents argued that beings from our future or parallel dimensions had somehow left technological artifacts in the distant past. The aluminum's advanced metallurgy and the object's pristine manufacturing represented technology beyond current human capabilities, proving that more advanced intelligences had somehow interacted with ancient Earth. But as metallurgists and archaeologists conducted more detailed analyses, serious problems emerged with all these extraordinary theories. The aluminum alloy composition, while initially puzzling, matched exactly the specifications used in modern industrial applications. Specifically, the elemental ratios corresponded to aluminum alloys commonly used in heavy machinery and construction equipment during the mid-20th century. The excavation context itself proved to be much more complicated than initially reported. The construction site where the wedge was discovered had been extensively disturbed by previous industrial activity. Heavy machinery had been operating in the area for months before the discovery, moving and redepositing sediments throughout the region. The neat geological layering that seemed to place the wedge alongside Pleistocene fossils was actually the result of mechanical mixing of materials from different time periods. Detailed examination of the artifact's shape and manufacturing marks revealed its true identity. The wedge wasn't an ancient mystery at all, but a replacement tooth from an excavator bucket, a standard component used in heavy construction equipment. These aluminum teeth are designed to be easily replaceable when they wear out or break off during digging operations. The distinctive wedge shape, the mounting holes, and the wear patterns all matched exactly with excavator teeth manufactured in the 1960s and early 1970s. The thick oxidation that had seemed to indicate great age was actually the result of exposure to the specific chemical conditions found in industrial construction sites. Aluminum corrodes rapidly in environments with high acidity and mineral content, conditions common around heavy machinery operations. The patina that had impressed researchers as evidence of geological aging could easily develop in a matter of months or years under these harsh chemical conditions. The mastodon teeth found alongside the wedge had indeed been preserved in ancient sediments, but they had been displaced and redeposited during the construction work. Heavy machinery operations commonly disturb buried fossil deposits, mixing ancient remains with modern debris in ways that can create misleading archaeological contexts. The association between the aluminum wedge and the Pleistocene fossils was coincidental, not indicative of contemporaneous burial. Even the discovery circumstances supported the modern explanation. The construction workers who found the artifact later admitted that several pieces of machinery had broken down during the excavation, with various parts and attachments lost in the mud and debris. The specific type of excavator used at the site was known to have aluminum bucket teeth that frequently broke off during heavy digging operations. Chemical analysis of the soil around the discovery site revealed traces of hydraulic fluid, motor oil, and other industrial contaminants consistent with heavy machinery operations. These chemical signatures were completely inconsistent with undisturbed Pleistocene deposits, but matched exactly what would be expected around a construction site, where equipment had been operating for extended periods. What continues to puzzle researchers isn't the wedge's true identity, which has been definitively established, but rather how industrial debris can become so thoroughly integrated into disturbed geological layers that it appears ancient. How often do construction operations inadvertently create archaeological contexts that mislead researchers about the age and significance of modern objects? And why are we so quick to invoke extraordinary explanations when more mundane industrial accidents provide perfectly adequate answers to apparent mysteries? The Ubaid lizard men. 7,000 years ago, while most of human civilization was still learning to farm and build permanent settlements, the people of southern Mesopotamia were creating something extraordinary. The Ubaid period, spanning from roughly 5,500 to 3,700 BCE, marked one of humanity's first great cultural flowering. These prehistoric communities along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers were developing irrigation systems, establishing the world's earliest temples, and creating sophisticated pottery that archaeologists still marvel at today. They were the foundation upon which the great Sumerian cities would later rise. This was a world of mud brick temples and carefully planned settlements, where communities were learning to work together on massive construction projects that required coordination and shared vision. The Ubaid people created some of humanity's first monumental architecture, building raised platforms that would evolve into the ziggurats of later civilizations. Their pottery showed artistic sophistication that suggested a society with leisure time for creative expression and the social organization to support specialized craftspeople. But among all their remarkable achievements, the Ubaid people left behind artifacts that continue to puzzle archaeologists and challenge our assumptions about ancient religious practices. Scattered throughout their settlements, excavators have discovered hundreds of clay figurines depicting beings that appear distinctly non-human. These creatures have elongated heads, large eyes, and what can only be described as reptilian features. They're shown in various poses, often holding babies, sometimes appearing to nurse infants, frequently depicted in positions suggesting ritual or ceremonial importance. The figurines were first discovered during British excavations at Tel al-Ubaid in the early 20th century, with similar artifacts later found at Eridu, and other Ubaid sites throughout southern Iraq. The craftsmanship is unmistakably deliberate. These aren't crude representations or artistic accidents. The figurines show careful attention to anatomical details, consistent iconography across multiple sites, and clear evidence of cultural significance within Ubaid society. What makes these artifacts so challenging to our understanding of ancient cultures is their departure from typical prehistoric art. When we examine figurines from other early civilizations, we generally find representations of clearly human forms, animals, or symbolic objects related to fertility and agriculture. The Ubaid lizard figures represent something entirely different. They appear to depict a distinct species or category of being that held important meaning for these ancient people. The figures show remarkable consistency in their reptilian characteristics. The heads are elongated and cone-shaped, with prominent ridges above large circular eyes. The mouths are often depicted as small slits, and the overall facial structure suggests something decidedly non-mammalian. Yet these beings are shown in distinctly human contexts, wearing jewelry, caring for children, and engaging in what appear to be ritual activities. Some of the most intriguing examples show female figures with reptilian heads holding human babies. The positioning and body language suggest nurturing behavior, yet the heads are unmistakably non-human. Other figurines depict standing figures in poses that suggest authority or ceremonial importance. The consistency of these representations across multiple sites indicates that they held widespread cultural significance throughout Ubaid society. The craftsmanship itself contradicts our expectations of prehistoric artistic capabilities. The figurines show sophisticated understanding of proportion, form, and symbolic representation. The claywork demonstrates technical skills that suggest specialized artisans working within established artistic traditions. These weren't random experiments or primitive attempts at representation, but sophisticated works created by skilled craftspeople following well-established cultural patterns. Archaeological context provides additional puzzles. The figurines have been found in residential areas, temple complexes, and burial contexts, suggesting they played multiple roles in Ubaid society. Some appear to have been household items, others seem associated with religious or ceremonial activities. The wide distribution and various contexts indicate that whatever these figures represented, it was deeply embedded in Ubaid culture and worldview. The implications for our understanding of prehistoric religious and mythological systems are profound. Most early religious imagery we've discovered focuses on fertility, animals, and natural phenomena. The Ubaid lizard figures suggest something more complex, a sophisticated mythological system that included non-human intelligent beings who played important roles in spiritual or social contexts. Modern scholars have proposed various interpretations. Some suggest the figures represent shamanic transformation, with human spiritual leaders depicted in the process of taking on animal characteristics during religious ceremonies. Others propose they represent mythological beings from Ubaid creation stories, perhaps ancestors or gods who are believed to have reptilian forms. The nursing mother figures present particular interpretive challenges. If these represent mythological beings, why are they shown caring for human children? Some researchers suggest this indicates a belief system where reptilian deities or ancestors were seen as protective nurturers of human society. Others propose the figures represent dual-nature beings, part human and part animal, common in many early mythological systems. Recent analysis has revealed that the figurines were made using advanced ceramic techniques for their time period. The clay was carefully prepared, the firing was controlled to achieve specific colours and textures, and the finishing work shows attention to detail that suggests these were important cultural objects worthy of significant time and skill investment. The fact that these figurines appear only during the Ubaid period adds another layer to their mystery. Earlier Mesopotamian cultures didn't produce similar reptilian imagery, and later Sumerian art, while it included various mythological beings, didn't continue the specific tradition of reptilian humanoids. This suggests that whatever cultural or religious significance these figures held was specific to Ubaid society and didn't survive the transition to later civilizations. The geographic distribution of the figurines is also significant. They appear throughout the Ubaid cultural sphere, from the marshlands of southern Iraq to sites hundreds of miles apart. This wide distribution indicates that the beliefs or practices they represented were shared across the entire Ubaid cultural network, not limited to individual communities or regions. What challenges our assumptions most profoundly is the sophistication these figurines imply about prehistoric mythological thinking. Rather than simple animistic beliefs or basic fertility concepts, the Ubaid lizard figures suggest complex mythological systems involving intelligent non-human beings who interacted with humans in nurturing and authoritative roles. This level of mythological sophistication pushes back our timeline for when humans developed complex religious and symbolic thinking. The mystery of the bog bodies, the spades sliced through layers of dark, waterlogged peat with the familiar rhythm that Viggo and Emil Højgaard had known since childhood. It was May 6, 1950, and the two Danish brothers were cutting fuel for their stove from the Bjælskovdal bog near Silkeborg, just as their family had done for generations. The acidic, spongy peat burned well once dried, providing essential heating fuel for rural Danish homes. But as Viggo's cutting tool struck something unusual about 10 feet down, their routine peat harvest was about to become one of archaeology's most significant discoveries. What emerged from the dark bog water wasn't another piece of ancient wood or a stone obstruction. It was a human face, so perfectly preserved that the brothers initially thought they had stumbled upon a recent murder victim. The skin was leather brown but intact. The facial features were clearly defined. The eyes were closed as if in peaceful sleep. Most remarkably, the man still wore what appeared to be a pointed leather cap and had a rope noose around his neck. The police arrived 2 days later, expecting to investigate a crime scene. But as investigators examined the body and the surrounding peat layers, they realized this was no recent killing. The man they were looking at had died roughly 2,000 years ago during the Iron Age, yet his body showed a level of preservation that seemed almost impossible. Not only were his facial features intact, but his fingerprints were still visible. The stubble on his chin could be clearly seen. Even his internal organs remained largely preserved. What the Højgaard brothers had discovered would become known as Tollund Man, the most famous member of a growing collection of similarly preserved ancient bodies found throughout the peat bogs of northern Europe. These bog bodies, as archaeologists came to call them, presented immediate mysteries that conventional understanding of decomposition couldn't explain. How could organic material survive for millennia when buried remains from the same period found in normal soil had long since turned to dust? The scientific analysis that followed revealed facts that were both fascinating and disturbing. Tollund Man had died sometime between 405 and 384 BCE during Denmark's pre-Roman Iron Age. His last meal, still identifiable in his stomach contents, consisted of a gruel made from barley, linseed, knotweed, and various other seeds. The meal contained no meat, suggesting he had eaten a simple vegetarian porridge hours before his death. But the most shocking discovery was the cause of death. The rope around Toland man's neck wasn't decorative or coincidental. He had been hanged. The noose was still in its original position, made from braided leather and sinew, pulled tight around his throat. This wasn't death from natural causes or accident. Someone had deliberately executed this man and then carefully placed his body in the bog. As more bog bodies were discovered throughout Denmark, Britain, Ireland, and other parts of northern Europe, a disturbing pattern emerged. Many showed evidence of violent deaths. Grauballer man, found in a Danish bog in 1952, had his throat cut so severely that he was nearly decapitated. Lindo man, discovered in an English bog in 1984, had been struck on the head, strangled, and had his throat cut in what appeared to be ritual overkill. The preservation itself presented scientific puzzles that took decades to solve. Normal decomposition occurs when bacteria break down organic tissue in the presence of oxygen. But bog environments create unique chemical conditions that halt this process. The water in peat bogs is extremely acidic with pH levels comparable to vinegar. This acidity is created by sphagnum moss, which releases compounds that lower the water's pH and create antimicrobial conditions. More importantly, bogs are anaerobic environments. The waterlogged conditions prevent oxygen from reaching submerged organic material, eliminating one of the key requirements for bacterial decomposition. The combination of high acidity and oxygen deprivation creates what scientists call a natural tanning process. The bog water contains high concentrations of humic acid and tannins, the same compounds used in leather production. These chemicals react with proteins in human tissue, essentially turning skin and other organic materials into leather-like substances that resist further decay. The mineral content of bog water also plays a crucial role. The acidic conditions dissolve calcium from bones, making them soft and pliable while simultaneously preserving soft tissues. This explains why bog bodies often have well-preserved skin, hair, and internal organs, but show significant bone deterioration. The chemical process literally trades bone preservation for soft tissue preservation. Research revealed that these preservation conditions are incredibly specific and fragile. Bodies found in bogs that had been drained or disturbed often showed rapid deterioration once exposed to normal atmospheric conditions. The chemistry that preserved them for millennia could be disrupted in hours if the bodies weren't immediately treated with specialized conservation techniques. The evidence of violent death raised profound questions about Iron Age European cultures. Were these individuals criminals executed for serious crimes? Were they human sacrifices offered to gods during times of crisis? Or were they victims of ritual killings connected to seasonal celebrations or religious ceremonies? The careful placement of bodies in bogs, often with valuable grave goods like jewelry or tools, suggested these deaths had ritual significance rather than being simple criminal executions. Analysis of Toland man's hand calluses indicated he hadn't been a manual labourer, suggesting he held some special status in his community. His well-preserved hands showed no signs of the heavy work that would have been common among ordinary Iron Age farmers or craftsmen. This evidence, combined with the careful treatment of his body after death, suggested he might have been a person of importance who was sacrificed for religious reasons, rather than executed as a criminal. The discovery of bog bodies continues to challenge archaeological assumptions about ancient European societies. Classical Roman writers like Tacitus described Germanic tribes practicing human sacrifice, but physical evidence of such practices had been scarce until the bog body discoveries provided undeniable proof that ritual killing occurred throughout northern Europe during the Iron Age. What remains puzzling is the selectivity of bog preservation. Why do some bogs preserve bodies while others don't? Why are bog bodies found primarily in certain regions of northern Europe and not in similar bog environments elsewhere? And why do the preservation conditions seem to favour certain time periods, with most bog bodies dating to the Iron Age rather than earlier or later periods? Modern forensic techniques continue to reveal new details about these ancient individuals. CT scans can now examine bog bodies without disturbing their delicate preservation. Isotope analysis of their teeth and bones reveals information about where they lived and what they ate throughout their lives. DNA analysis, though challenging due to the acidic conditions, sometimes provides information about their genetic heritage and family relationships. Yet fundamental questions remain unanswered. Were bog body victims specifically chosen for sacrifice, or were they simply convenient targets for ritual killing? Did different regions practice different types of ritual murder? Or were these isolated incidents rather than systematic religious practices? And why were bog locations chosen for body disposal if the goal was human sacrifice rather than simple murder? The Phaistos disc. The facts about the Phaistos disc are deceptively simple. On July 3, 1908, Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier discovered a circular clay disc approximately 16 centimeters in diameter in the basement of a Minoan palace on the island of Crete. The disc is covered on both sides with 242 unique symbols arranged in a spiral pattern, impressed into the clay using individual stamps before firing. It dates to sometime between 1700 and 1600 BCE, during the height of Minoan civilization. The disc currently resides in the Archaeological Museum of Heraklion, where it has puzzled scholars for over a century. These are the only undisputed facts. Everything else about the Phaistos disc enters the realm of speculation, theory, and fierce academic debate. The symbols resist every attempt at translation. The language they represent remains unknown. The purpose of the disc continues to baffle researchers, and increasingly some scholars question whether the artifact is genuine at all. The first systematic analysis began almost immediately after Pernier's discovery. The spiral arrangement of symbols, reading from the outside edge toward the centre, contains what appear to be distinct word groups separated by vertical lines. There are 45 different symbol types in total, ranging from recognizable images like human figures, animals, and tools to abstract geometric designs. Some symbols appear frequently throughout the text, while others occur only once or twice. Early decipherment attempts focused on identifying the language family the symbols might represent. Some researchers proposed connections to ancient Greek, arguing that the Minoan civilization would have used an early form of the language that later dominated the region. Others suggested links to Anatolian languages, given the extensive trade connections between Crete and Asia Minor during the Bronze Age. The symbol set itself provided tantalizing clues. Several images clearly depict recognizable objects: a man walking, a fish, a bird, various plants, geometric patterns, and what appear to be tools or weapons. This pictographic element led many researchers to compare the disc to other ancient writing systems, like Egyptian hieroglyphs or early Mesopotamian cuneiform, both of which began as pictographic systems before evolving into more abstract representations. But significant problems emerged with every translation attempt. The symbol frequency doesn't match the letter distribution patterns found in any known Indo-European language. The supposed word groups vary wildly in length, from single symbols to chains of over a dozen characters. Most puzzling of all, no repeated phrases or formulaic expressions appear anywhere on the disc, making it impossible to identify common words or grammatical structures. In the 1950s, scholars began applying statistical analysis to the symbol patterns. They discovered that the disc contains too few repeated symbol combinations to represent a normal text in any known language type. The mathematical distribution of symbols suggests either an extremely unusual linguistic structure or possibly a non-linguistic use entirely. Some proposed the disc might be a game board, a religious ritual object, or an astronomical calendar rather than written text. The decipherment attempts became increasingly creative and controversial. Researchers claimed to have identified everything from Minoan prayers to ancient songs to historical chronicles. One theory suggested the disc contained a hymn to a Minoan goddess. Another proposed it recorded a military campaign. Still others argued it was a legal document or a royal decree. Each translation was quickly challenged by other scholars who found fundamental flaws in the linguistic assumptions or symbol interpretations. Modern computational analysis has brought sophisticated new tools to the problem. Computer programs can now analyze symbol patterns, frequency distributions, and potential linguistic structures with unprecedented precision. These studies have confirmed that the symbol distribution is highly unusual and doesn't match any known ancient writing system. The disc appears to use a unique script that follows its own internal logic, but doesn't correspond to expected patterns for alphabetic, syllabic, or logographic writing systems. The genuineness debate intensified dramatically in 2008 when Jerome Eisenberg, a respected expert in ancient art forgery, published a detailed analysis arguing that the Phaistos disc was a modern fake. Eisenberg pointed out several suspicious characteristics: the disk's unusually perfect preservation compared to other Minoan clay artifacts, the lack of any similar objects from the same period, and what he claimed were anachronistic elements in the symbol designs. Eisenberg's forgery theory gained traction when he noted that the disk's discovery circumstances were poorly documented. Pernier wasn't actually present when the disk was found. It was discovered by his assistant and local workers. The archaeological context was disturbed, making it difficult to verify the disk's stratigraphic position. Most damaging to authenticity claims, no similar inscribed objects have ever been found at Phaistos or any other Minoan site, despite extensive excavation throughout Crete. The forgery debate has revealed troubling inconsistencies in the original discovery records. The disk was found in a deposit containing pottery from different periods, suggesting the archaeological layer had been disturbed in antiquity. Some pottery fragments appeared to be much later than the disk's supposed date, raising questions about whether all the artifacts in the deposit were actually contemporary. Chemical analysis of the clay has provided inconclusive results. While the disk's material is consistent with Cretan clay sources, this doesn't prove ancient origin, since a forger would likely have used local materials. Thermoluminescence dating, which could definitively establish when the clay was fired, has never been performed on the disk, despite repeated requests from researchers. The museum authorities have consistently refused to allow testing that might damage the artifact. The symbol stamps present another puzzle. The precision and consistency of the impressions suggest the use of individual metal or stone stamps for each symbol type, but no such stamps have ever been found anywhere in the Minoan world, despite the discovery of numerous seal stones and other carved objects. If the disk is genuine, where are the tools used to create it? Why was this advanced printing technology used only once in Minoan civilization? Recent scholarship has shifted focus from decipherment attempts to understanding the disk's cultural context. If genuine, the object represents a unique technological achievement in Bronze Age writing systems. The use of movable type predates Gutenberg's printing press by over 3,000 years. The spiral arrangement and circular format are unlike any other ancient text known to archaeology. Yet this uniqueness itself raises suspicions. Why would such an innovative writing technology be used for only one known document? Why does the disk show no evolutionary development from simpler precedents or influence on later writing systems? The complete isolation of the disk from any related artifacts or technologies is unprecedented in the archaeological record. The crystal skulls. The claims surrounding crystal skulls read like a Hollywood script written by someone with unlimited imagination and no concern for historical plausibility. According to their most devoted believers, these artifacts were created by advanced Atlantean civilizations using laser technology that wouldn't be invented for thousands of years. They supposedly contain the accumulated wisdom of lost Maya priests, emit mystical energy that can heal diseases and grant psychic powers, and serve as interdimensional communication devices left behind by extraterrestrial visitors who once ruled ancient Mexico. Anna Mitchell Hedges, who claimed to have discovered the most famous crystal skull, insisted it was the legendary Skull of Doom mentioned in Maya prophecy, carved from a single piece of pure quartz without any tool marks whatsoever. She maintained that touching the skull could kill a person through supernatural forces, that it glowed in darkness, that her father Frederick Mitchell Hedges had found it in 1924 beneath a Maya temple at Lubantun in Belize, and that local Maya workers had immediately recognized it as their most sacred artifact, dancing around it for days in religious ecstasy. The skull, according to Anna's evolving story, had been used by Maya high priests to will death upon enemies, to predict the future, and to communicate with gods. She claimed it was carved against the natural crystal grain of the quartz, something that should be impossible without shattering the stone. Most remarkably, she insisted that modern technology could not determine how the skull had been made, suggesting manufacturing techniques that surpassed current human capabilities. These extraordinary claims attracted worldwide attention and spawned an entire industry of crystal skull mythology. Psychic researchers claimed the skulls emitted auras visible to sensitive individuals. New Age believers incorporated them into elaborate theories about Mayan cosmic consciousness and galactic alignment prophecies. Documentary filmmakers and authors built careers around the supposed mysteries, each adding new layers of supernatural claims. But when serious scientific investigation began, the crystal skull story fell apart piece by piece. The first systematic analysis came from the British Museum and Smithsonian Institution, both of which owned crystal skulls that had been donated or purchased in the late 1800s. In 2008, they conducted joint research using electron microscopy, ion beam analysis, and other advanced techniques to examine the skull's surface characteristics. The results were definitive and devastating to authenticity claims. Both skulls showed clear evidence of having been carved with rotating wheel tools, technology that wasn't available to pre-Columbian Mesoamerican cultures. The microscopic analysis revealed perfectly parallel tool marks consistent with modern diamond-tipped cutting implements. The surface polishing showed characteristics that matched 19th century European lapidary techniques, not ancient carving methods. The British Museum skull, supposedly of Aztec origin, showed tool marks indicating it had been carved with jeweler's wheels of the type used in Germany during the 1800s. The quartz itself was traced to Brazil, not Mexico, based on its distinctive mineral inclusions and isotopic signature. The Smithsonian skull showed similar evidence of modern manufacture, with tool marks that matched exactly the cutting patterns produced by commercial gem-cutting equipment. Anna Mitchell Hedges' discovery story proved equally problematic when subjected to investigation. Her account of finding the skull changed dramatically over time. In early versions, she claimed her father discovered it. Later, she said she found it herself while celebrating her 17th birthday at the excavation site. The date shifted between 1924 and 1927, depending on which interview you consulted. Most damaging to her credibility, Frederick Mitchell Hedges' own detailed expedition journals from Lubantun make no mention of any crystal skull discovery. The expedition's official archaeological reports, filed with the British Museum and other institutions, contain no reference to crystal skull findings. Team photographs from the excavation show Maya workers and expedition members, but no crystal skull appears in any documentation from the dig. Local Maya people interviewed decades later had no memory or oral tradition of any crystal skull discovery at Lubantun. Further investigation revealed that Frederick Mitchell Hedges had serious financial troubles in the 1940s and was selling artifacts from his collection to pay debts. Auction records show that Sotheby's sold a crystal skull matching the description of Anna's skull in 1943, with Frederick as the consignor. The skull sold for the equivalent of about $1,000 in modern currency, hardly the price one would expect for an object of supposedly sacred significance and mystical powers. The scientific analysis extended to other crystal skulls in museum collections worldwide. Without exception, every skull examined showed evidence of modern carving techniques. None displayed any characteristics consistent with pre-Columbian manufacturing methods. The quartz types matched commercial gem sources rather than Mexican mineral deposits. The carving styles reflected European rather than Mesoamerican artistic traditions. Archaeological excavations throughout Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and other areas of Maya civilization have never uncovered a single authentic pre-Columbian crystal skull. This absence is particularly significant because Maya sites have yielded thousands of jade, obsidian, bone, and ceramic artifacts, many with excellent preservation. If crystal skulls had been important ritual objects, archaeological evidence would certainly exist. The toolmark analysis revealed specific details about the manufacturing process. The skulls were rough carved using diamond saws, then shaped with rotating grinding wheels, and finally polished with successively finer abrasives applied with motorized polishing equipment. This technique produces characteristic parallel striations that are clearly visible under electron microscopy. No hand carving or percussion flaking marks appear anywhere on the skull's surfaces. What genuinely puzzles researchers about the crystal skull phenomenon isn't their authenticity, which has been definitively disproven, but rather their cultural impact and persistence in popular belief. Despite overwhelming scientific evidence that all known crystal skulls are modern creations, they continue to attract believers who insist on their supernatural properties and ancient origins. The skulls represent a perfect case study in how cultural desires can override scientific evidence. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw enormous public fascination with exotic artifacts and lost civilizations, European and American collectors eagerly purchased objects that seemed to validate romantic notions about mysterious ancient cultures with advanced knowledge. German workshops in the town of Oberstein became centres for creating decorative objects from imported South American quartz during the 1800s. These craftsmen had both the skills and materials necessary to carve realistic crystal skulls for the collector market. The skulls were likely created as curios or decorative objects, not deliberate forgeries, but were later marketed with increasingly elaborate origin stories. What continues to mystify anthropologists and psychologists isn't the skulls themselves, but why people remain convinced of their authenticity despite clear evidence to the contrary. How do objects with completely debunked origin stories maintain their cultural power? And why do some individuals continue to report supernatural experiences with artifacts that science has proven to be recent European manufactures? The Ica stones. The most outrageous claims about the Ica stones challenge everything we know about the history of life on Earth. According to their most devoted supporters, these carved andesite rocks from Peru prove that humans lived alongside dinosaurs, that ancient civilizations possessed advanced medical knowledge, including heart transplant surgery, and that prehistoric peoples had telescopes powerful enough to observe distant galaxies. Some stones allegedly show humans riding dinosaurs like horses. Others depict advanced surgical procedures being performed with sophisticated instruments, and still others contain star maps that wouldn't be discovered by modern astronomy for centuries. Dr. Javier Cabrera d'Arquea, the Peruvian physician who popularized the stones, starting in 1966, claimed they were the library of a lost civilization he called Glyptolithic man. According to Cabrera, these ancient people had achieved scientific advancement far beyond modern capabilities. They could perform organ transplants, genetic engineering, and even control continental drift. The stones, he argued, were their way of preserving knowledge for future generations before a global catastrophe destroyed their civilization. Cabrera's collection eventually grew to over 15,000 stones, each covered with intricate engravings depicting impossible scenes. Some stones showed humans hunting or domesticating creatures that looked unmistakably like Triceratops, Stegosaurus, and Tyrannosaurus rex. Others depicted surgical procedures with patients connected to complex life support systems. Still others contained detailed astronomical charts showing the positions of stars and planets that supposedly couldn't be observed without powerful telescopes. The implications, if true, would revolutionize our understanding of natural history, human evolution, and ancient civilizations. Dinosaurs supposedly died out 65 million years before humans evolved, yet the Ica stones seem to show these species coexisting. The medical procedures depicted required knowledge of anatomy and surgical techniques that weren't developed until the 20th century. The astronomical observations implied technology that wouldn't exist for thousands of years after the stones were supposedly carved. These claims attracted worldwide attention from researchers challenging conventional scientific timelines. Creation scientists embraced the stones as proof that dinosaurs and humans lived simultaneously, supporting a young Earth interpretation of history. Alternative historians saw them as evidence of advanced prehistoric civilizations that mainstream archaeology refused to acknowledge. UFO researchers proposed they documented visits from extraterrestrial beings who shared advanced technology with ancient peoples. But when investigators began examining the stones' origins and authenticity, the extraordinary claims quickly collapsed. The first major problem was the source of the stones themselves. Cabrera obtained most of his collection from local farmers, particularly Basilio Uschuya, who sold him thousands of carved stones over several years. When questioned about where he found these artifacts, Uschuya's story changed repeatedly and contained numerous inconsistencies. Initially, Uschuya claimed the stones came from ancient burial sites and caves in the surrounding desert, but when archaeologists attempted to investigate these locations, no evidence of similar carvings or ancient human activity could be found. The caves Uschuya described either didn't exist or contained no archaeological deposits. The burial sites he mentioned showed no signs of having been disturbed or containing carved stone artifacts. Under pressure from authorities investigating illegal antiquities trafficking, Uschuya eventually confessed to a BBC documentary crew that he had carved all the stones himself. He demonstrated his carving techniques using simple tools to create intricate designs on andesite stones. The process, he explained, involved sketching designs based on pictures from books and magazines, then carving them using dental burrs and small chisels. A thin coating of shoe polish gave the fresh carvings an aged appearance. Ushua's confession revealed the economic motivation behind the stone production. Tourists and collectors were willing to pay significant amounts for authentic pre-Columbian artifacts, creating a lucrative market for fake antiquities. The farmer and his family had discovered they could earn more money carving stones than farming, especially as international interest in the Ica stones grew throughout the 1970s and 1980s. Scientific analysis of the stones confirmed their modern origin. The carving techniques showed tool marks consistent with modern metal implements, particularly dental equipment and electric rotary tools. The oxidation patterns on the carved surfaces indicated recent exposure to air and moisture, not the deep weathering expected from ancient artifacts. Most tellingly, microscopic analysis revealed tiny metal fragments embedded in the carving grooves, residue from modern cutting tools. The artistic style and subject matter also betrayed modern origins. The dinosaur depictions closely matched illustrations from popular paleontology books available in the 1960s, including artistic inaccuracies that had been corrected by the time the stones appeared. The surgical scenes showed modern medical procedures and equipment that wouldn't be recognizable to ancient peoples. Even the human figures wore clothing and hairstyles that reflected mid-20th century artistic conventions rather than ancient Peruvian cultures. The astronomical charts on some stones presented similar problems. The star positions and celestial objects depicted matched modern astronomical knowledge and observation techniques, not what would be visible to naked eye observers in ancient Peru. Some stones even showed galaxies and nebulae that require powerful telescopes to detect, complete with details that match 20th century astrophotography. Cabrera's role in the deception became clearer as investigators examined his methods and motivations. Despite his medical training and scientific background, he never subjected the stones to rigorous analysis or peer review. He refused to allow independent researchers to examine his collection using modern dating techniques or materials analysis. His publications about the stones appeared in popular books and magazines, rather than scientific journals, avoiding the scrutiny of expert review. When confronted with evidence of the stone's modern origin, Cabrera claimed he was protecting Ushuaia from prosecution under Peru's antiquities laws by maintaining the fiction that they were ancient artifacts. This explanation, however, doesn't account for Cabrera's own promotion of increasingly elaborate theories about ancient civilizations and lost technologies based on the carved images. What genuinely puzzles researchers about the Ica stones isn't their authenticity, which has been definitively disproven, but rather the persistence of belief in their ancient origins despite overwhelming evidence of modern creation. The stones continue to appear in books, documentaries, and websites promoting alternative theories about human history and prehistoric civilizations. Even after Ushuaia's public confession and scientific debunking, some believers maintain that at least some stones in the collection might be genuine ancient artifacts, the Michigan relics. The shovel hit something hard 3 feet below the surface of Daniel Soper's farm near Edmore, Michigan, in the spring of 1890. James Scottford, a sign painter who had been digging post holes for a fence, carefully cleared away the dirt to reveal what appeared to be a large clay vessel buried in the soil. As he lifted it from the ground, both men could see that the object was covered with strange markings that looked like some form of ancient writing. Neither Scottford nor Soper recognized the script, but both sensed they had discovered something extraordinary. Word of the discovery spread quickly through the rural Michigan community. Within days, local antiquarians and amateur historians were examining the clay casket and its mysterious inscriptions. Some claimed to recognize Hebrew characters, others saw similarities to Egyptian hieroglyphs, and still others suggested the markings might represent Native American pictographs of unprecedented sophistication. The artifact appeared to be exactly what many 19th century Americans desperately wanted to find: physical proof that advanced civilizations had flourished in North America long before European contact. According to the most sensational interpretations that followed, the Michigan relics represented evidence of a massive pre-Columbian migration to North America by peoples from the ancient Middle East. Supporters claimed the artifacts proved that Hebrew-speaking peoples had established thriving colonies throughout the Great Lakes region thousands of years before Christ. Some went further, suggesting the relics documented early Christian missionaries who had reached America in the 1st century CE, bringing biblical knowledge to indigenous populations. The most outrageous claims proposed that the artifacts revealed the location of the lost tribes of Israel in ancient Michigan. Enthusiasts argued that the Hebrew inscriptions recorded biblical history as it unfolded in the New World, complete with references to familiar Old Testament figures and events. Some claimed to have translated passages describing the construction of temples, the establishment of cities, and the spread of monotheistic religion among prehistoric American peoples. As more artifacts emerged from sites throughout Michigan, the theories became increasingly elaborate. Scotford and Soper, working together now as a team, discovered hundreds of additional objects: clay tablets covered with Hebrew script, copper plates with biblical scenes, stone figurines depicting Middle Eastern peoples, and metal tools that supposedly demonstrated advanced metallurgical knowledge among ancient American civilizations. Religious communities, particularly the Latter-day Saints, showed intense interest in the discoveries. The artifacts seemed to provide archaeological validation for beliefs about ancient civilizations in the Americas. Church leaders and scholars traveled to Michigan to examine the relics, and some prominent figures endorsed their authenticity. Museums acquired specimens for their collections, and popular publications featured articles about the sensational discoveries. But when serious archaeological investigation began, the extraordinary claims quickly unraveled. The first systematic analysis came from John Wesley Powell at the Smithsonian Institution, who had been tracking reports of the Michigan discoveries with growing skepticism. Powell's team examined several of the artifacts using techniques that revealed immediate problems with their supposed antiquity. The Hebrew inscriptions proved to be the most damaging evidence against authenticity. When genuine Hebrew scholars examined the script, they found numerous errors that would never appear in ancient texts. The letter forms mixed different historical periods, combining archaic characters with medieval variants in ways that suggested copying from multiple modern sources rather than authentic ancient writing. The grammar was incorrect. The vocabulary included words that didn't exist in ancient Hebrew, and the overall text structure reflected 19th century European understanding of Hebrew rather than genuine ancient usage. Archaeological context presented equally serious problems. None of the artifacts came from controlled excavations, with proper documentation of their discovery circumstances. Every single relic was found either by Scotford alone or in the presence of Scotford and Soper, usually during routine digging activities like fence construction or well digging. Professional archaeologists who investigated the supposed discovery sites found no evidence of ancient occupation, no associated artifacts from controlled contexts, and no stratigraphy that would support claims of great antiquity. Chemical analysis of the artifacts revealed their modern origin. The clay composition matched local Michigan materials, but the firing temperatures and techniques were consistent with contemporary pottery making rather than ancient ceramic traditions. Metal components showed modern alloys and manufacturing techniques. Most tellingly, the oxidation patterns and wear characteristics indicated exposure to soil conditions for decades, not centuries or millennia. The tool marks on carved elements provided definitive proof of modern creation. Microscopic analysis revealed cuts made with steel implements of types not available to pre-Columbian peoples. The carving techniques matched exactly those used by 19th century craftsmen, complete with specific tool marks that could be traced to contemporary woodworking and stone-cutting equipment. Investigation into Scotford and Soper's backgrounds revealed both the motive and means for creating the hoax. Scotford was a skilled craftsman with experience in sign painting, wood carving, and metalworking. Soper was a former Michigan Secretary of State who had been forced to resign due to corruption scandals and was desperate to restore his reputation and financial situation. Both men had access to Hebrew language materials through local religious communities and libraries. The financial incentives were substantial. Museums, private collectors, and religious organizations were willing to pay significant sums for authentic pre-Columbian artifacts that supported theories about ancient Middle Eastern contact with America. The Michigan relics market became increasingly lucrative as national attention focused on the discoveries. When confronted with evidence of fraud, both Scotford and Soper initially denied creating the artifacts. However, further investigation revealed that Scotford had been seen carving similar objects in his workshop. and local residents reported seeing freshly buried artifacts in locations where discoveries occurred days later. The pattern of finds always occurred in areas where the two men had been working, never in locations investigated by independent archaeologists. The final exposure came through scientific dating techniques that definitively established the artifact's recent origin. Thermoluminescence dating of the ceramic components showed they had been fired in the late 1800s, not in ancient times. Chemical analysis of metal corrosion confirmed exposure to soil for decades rather than centuries. The Los Alamos stones. 20,000 years ago, during the height of the last ice age, small bands of hunter-gatherers were creating some of humanity's most spectacular art in the caves of France and Spain. These Paleolithic artists painted magnificent horses, bison, and mammoth with sophisticated techniques that demonstrated remarkable artistic skill and cultural complexity. Their work represented the flowering of human creativity during humanity's infancy, when survival should have left no time for artistic expression. But half a world away, in what would become the high mesas and deep canyons of New Mexico's Pajarito Plateau, a very different story was unfolding. The region that now houses Los Alamos was home to diverse cultures over thousands of years, from archaic peoples to ancestral Puebloans to historic native tribes. What they left behind on the volcanic rock faces challenges everything we think we know about the development of artistic traditions in the Americas. In 1942, when government surveyors were mapping the remote Los Alamos area for what would become the Manhattan Project, they stumbled upon something that didn't fit their expectations of prehistoric American art. Hidden in caves and scattered across cliff faces throughout the region were rock art panels that bore striking similarities to the famous Paleolithic cave paintings of Europe. The discovery moment came when a young surveyor, exploring a narrow canyon for security purposes, entered a shallow cave and found himself face to face with artwork that looked remarkably like the sophisticated animal depictions from Lascaux and Altamira. The paintings showed the same mastery of line and form, the same understanding of animal anatomy, and the same use of natural rock contours to create three-dimensional effects that characterize the best European cave art. But these images were created thousands of miles away from Europe, in a landscape and cultural context that should have produced entirely different artistic traditions. According to conventional understanding of New World prehistory, the artistic traditions of the Americas developed independently from those of Europe and Asia. The first peoples to reach the Americas crossed the Bering Land Bridge around 15,000 years ago, carrying with them cultural traditions that would evolve in isolation from Old World influences. Their rock art should reflect uniquely American artistic sensibilities, distinct iconography, and different approaches to representing the natural world. Yet the Los Alamos cave paintings seem to suggest something else entirely. The artistic techniques, the choice of subjects, and even the composition of the panels showed remarkable parallels to European Paleolithic art. Large mammals dominated the imagery, rendered with naturalistic precision that captured not just their physical appearance but their movement and behaviour. The artists had used natural rock formations to enhance their images, creating the same sense of depth and dimensionality that made European cave art so compelling. The cultural implications were profound. If these similarities represented independent development, they suggested that human artistic expression followed universal patterns regardless of geographic isolation. Prehistoric artists separated by vast distances and thousands of years had somehow arrived at similar solutions to the challenge of representing the natural world on stone surfaces. This would indicate that certain artistic approaches are fundamental to human cognition rather than cultural accidents. The discovery gained urgency when archaeologists realized the painting's vulnerable location. The cave systems and rock shelters containing the art were scattered throughout an area that was rapidly becoming restricted military territory. Access was limited, documentation was incomplete, and the long-term preservation of the sites was uncertain. Many of the most remarkable panels were recorded only in hasty field notes and poor quality photographs taken by researchers working under security restrictions. Initial analysis revealed technical sophistication that contradicted expectations about prehistoric American art. The painters had used multiple pigment sources, creating a palette that allowed for subtle colour variations and shading effects. They had prepared painting surfaces by cleaning and sometimes etching the rock, showing the same attention to surface preparation found in the best European examples. Most remarkably, they had demonstrated the same understanding of perspective and proportion that made Paleolithic art so remarkable. The subject matter also challenged assumptions about New World iconography. While much Native American rock art focuses on geometric patterns, human figures, and spiritual symbols, the Los Alamos paintings emphasized naturalistic animal depictions. Large mammals were rendered with anatomical accuracy that suggested close observation and deep understanding of animal behavior. The artists had captured moments of movement, interaction, and environmental context that brought their subjects to life on the stone surfaces. Archaeological dating of the sites proved difficult due to the security restrictions and limited access for research. The few samples that could be analysed suggested the paintings spanned several thousand years, with some potentially dating to the Archaic period around 7,000 years ago. This timing would make them contemporary with some of the latest European cave art traditions, raising questions about potential connections or parallel development. The preservation of organic pigments in the dry New Mexico environment provided opportunities for analysis that weren't available at most European sites. Chemical analysis revealed sophisticated paint preparation techniques, including the use of mineral binders and organic additives that enhance pigment adhesion and longevity. The painters had developed their own technical solutions to challenges that European artists had solved in different ways, yet the end results showed remarkable similarities in appearance and durability. What truly puzzles researchers about the Los Alamos cave art isn't just its European-like appearance, but its isolation within regional artistic traditions. The sophisticated naturalistic style doesn't appear elsewhere in the Southwest's extensive rock art record. The technical methods and artistic approaches seem to represent a unique development that flourished briefly and then disappeared, leaving no clear descendants in later Native American art traditions. How did such sophisticated artistic knowledge develop in isolation, and why did it not spread to other regional cultures? The Bat Creek inscription. The most outrageous claims about the Bat Creek inscription suggest it provides definitive proof that ancient Israelites reached Tennessee in the 1st century CE, establishing colonies along the Little Tennessee River and leaving behind Hebrew inscriptions that document their presence in North America. According to the most extreme interpretations, the stone represents evidence of the lost tribes of Israel, early Christian missionaries, or even refugees fleeing the Roman destruction of Jerusalem, who somehow crossed the Atlantic Ocean and settled in Appalachian valleys. Some proponents have claimed the inscription translates to "for the land of Judah" in Paleo-Hebrew script, suggesting organized Jewish settlement in prehistoric Tennessee. Others have interpreted it as the 17th year of Nero, or various biblical references that would date the artifact to the 1st century CE. The most sensational theories propose that the Bat Creek stone is just one piece of evidence for extensive Old World contact with ancient America, supporting religious beliefs about pre-Columbian civilizations in the New World. But the known facts about the Bat Creek inscription present a much more complex and ultimately disappointing picture. The stone was discovered in February 1889 by John Emmert, a field assistant working for Cyrus Thomas's Smithsonian Institution Mound Survey project. Emmert was excavating a burial mound along Bat Creek in Loudoun County, Tennessee, when he reportedly found a small stone bearing strange markings beneath the skull of one of 9 skeletons in the burial. The excavation was conducted as part of Thomas's massive federal project to investigate prehistoric mounds throughout the eastern United States. Thomas had been appointed by John Wesley Powell to systematically examine thousands of mounds and settle the question of whether they had been built by a mysterious lost race of mound builders or by the ancestors of historic Native American tribes. The work was considered scientifically rigorous for its time, with detailed documentation and careful excavation methods. Emmert's discovery report described finding the inscribed stone in direct association with Native American burial goods, including typical Cherokee-style pottery and brass artifacts that indicated contact with European traders. The burial context appeared to be a historic Cherokee cemetery, probably dating to the 18th or early 19th century based on the associated artifacts. Thomas initially interpreted the markings as Cherokee syllabic writing and published the find as evidence of Native American literacy. The first scientific analysis of the inscription focused on the archaeological context and associated artifacts. The burial mound contained typical Cherokee materials, including European trade goods like brass ornaments that clearly dated the site to the historic period after European contact. Radiocarbon dating of organic materials from the burial eventually provided dates ranging from 1030 to 1210 CE, well into the historic Cherokee occupation of the Tennessee Valley. But in 1970, Hebrew scholar Cyrus Gordon examined photographs of the inscription and declared it to be genuine Paleo-Hebrew script dating to the 1st or 2nd century CE. Gordon's interpretation immediately transformed the Bat Creek stone from a minor archaeological curiosity into a major controversy. His translation suggested the inscription read "for the Judeans" and represented physical evidence of ancient Middle Eastern contact with North America. The Hebrew interpretation gained support from other scholars who argued that the letter forms matched authentic ancient Hebrew inscriptions from the Dead Sea Scrolls and other 1st century sources. They dismissed the radiocarbon dates as contamination or error, insisting that the Hebrew script proved much greater antiquity. Some researchers proposed elaborate theories about how ancient Israelites could have reached Tennessee involving Phoenician sea routes or Mediterranean trading expeditions. However, detailed linguistic analysis revealed fatal flaws in the Hebrew interpretation. When Hebrew language experts examined the inscription carefully, they found numerous problems that undermined claims of authenticity. The letter forms showed inconsistencies that would never appear in genuine ancient Hebrew writing. Some characters were backwards or upside down compared to authentic examples. The supposed Hebrew text contained grammatical errors and used letters combinations that didn't exist in ancient Hebrew. More damaging still, researchers discovered that the inscription closely matched a Hebrew text that appeared in a popular 19th century reference book. The 1870 edition of General Lew Wallace's novel Ben-Hur contained Hebrew inscriptions that were nearly identical to the Bat Creek stone markings. The similarities were so precise that they suggested direct copying rather than coincidental resemblance. Archaeological reanalysis of Emmett's excavation records revealed additional problems with the Hebrew theory. Emmett had worked alone during most of the Bat Creek excavation, unusual for the normally well-supervised Smithsonian project. His field notes showed inconsistencies and contained details that didn't match standard archaeological reporting procedures. Most significantly, Emmett had financial and personal problems that gave him strong motivation to produce sensational discoveries that would impress his supervisors. Investigation into Emmett's background revealed that he was considered unreliable by his Smithsonian colleagues. He had drinking problems, had been caught falsifying expense reports, and was suspected of planting artifacts at other sites to enhance their apparent significance. Several other inscribed stones found by Emmett showed similar suspicious characteristics, including mixing of different cultural elements that wouldn't occur naturally in authentic archaeological contexts. The final exposure of the fraud came through microscopic analysis of the stone itself. Modern techniques revealed tool marks that matched steel implements used in the late 19th century, not the stone or bronze tools that would have been available to ancient peoples. The carving showed characteristics consistent with modern metalworking tools, and the oxidation patterns on the carved surfaces indicated exposure to air for decades rather than centuries. Costa Rica stone spheres. The chainsaw bit deep into the mahogany tree, sending chips of fragrant wood flying across the humid jungle floor. It was 1939, and workers for the United Fruit Company were carving another banana plantation from the dense rainforest of Costa Rica's Diquis Delta. As the massive tree crashed to the ground, something unexpected rolled out from beneath its ancient roots. Not another fallen log or displaced boulder, but a perfectly round stone sphere polished to an almost mirror-like surface, gleaming in the filtered jungle light. The workers gathered around this strange object, running their hands over its flawless curves. It was unlike anything they had seen in years of clearing Central American forests. The sphere measured nearly 6 feet in diameter and must have weighed several tons, yet its surface was so perfectly smooth and round that it seemed almost manufactured. As they continued their forest clearing operations, more spheres emerged from the jungle floor. Some were massive, others small enough to hold in 2 hands, but all shared the same mysterious perfection. Between 300 and 1500 CE, while Europe struggled through its dark ages and the Maya civilization was reaching its classical peak, a culture was flourishing in the river valleys and coastal plains of southern Costa Rica that possessed remarkable knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and stoneworking. The Dikwis people, as archaeologists would later name them, built complex societies around the fertile river deltas, created sophisticated gold work that rivaled anything produced in the Americas, and developed agricultural systems that supported substantial populations. But their most enigmatic legacy wasn't their impressive gold artifacts or their complex settlements. It was hundreds of stone spheres, ranging from basketball-sized orbs to massive monuments over 8 feet in diameter, scattered throughout their territory with a precision and purpose that continues to baffle researchers. These weren't crude approximations of spherical shapes, but geometrically perfect spheres that deviated from true roundness by less than 2 centimeters, even on the largest examples. According to conventional understanding of pre-Columbian stoneworking capabilities, creating such perfect spheres should have been nearly impossible with the tools available to ancient American cultures. The Dikwis people worked primarily with stone implements, wooden tools, and the occasional piece of meteoric iron. They had no metal cutting tools, no precision measuring devices, and no mathematical instruments that could calculate the complex geometry required for perfect spherical construction. Yet archaeological investigation revealed that these ancient craftsmen had somehow mastered techniques that modern sculptors find challenging even with power tools and laser measurement devices. The spheres were carved from various types of volcanic rock, including gabbro, a particularly hard stone that requires significant skill and specialized techniques to shape. The surface finishing showed evidence of multiple stages of grinding and polishing that would have taken enormous amounts of time and expertise. The discovery sparked intense scientific interest when Doris Stone, daughter of a United Fruit Company executive and trained archaeologist, began the first systematic study of the spheres in the early 1940s. Stone documented the locations and characteristics of dozens of spheres, noting that they appeared to be arranged in specific patterns throughout Dikwis territory. Some were grouped in straight lines, others formed triangular arrangements, and still others seemed to mark important geographical or astronomical alignments. The archaeological context revealed even more puzzling information. Many spheres were found in association with elaborate stone foundations, suggesting they had been placed deliberately as part of larger architectural complexes. Some appeared to mark entrances to important buildings or ceremonial areas. Others seemed to define territorial boundaries or mark significant locations in the landscape. The careful placement indicated that these objects held deep cultural significance beyond mere artistic achievement. Stone's research, later continued by archaeologists like Samuel Lothrop, revealed sophisticated understanding of engineering principles that challenged assumptions about pre-Columbian technological capabilities. The larger spheres, weighing up to 15 tons, had been transported across difficult terrain from quarry sites to their final locations. This required not only advanced stoneworking skills, but also complex logistical planning and social organisation to coordinate the massive labour requirements. The precision of the spherical construction became even more remarkable when modern measurement techniques were applied. Laser scanning and three-dimensional analysis confirmed that even the largest spheres maintained near-perfect roundness, with variations of less than 1% from true spherical geometry. This level of precision required mathematical knowledge that archaeologists hadn't previously associated with pre-Columbian American cultures. The tool marks and surface characteristics provided clues about construction techniques that seemed to exceed the technological capabilities attributed to the Dikwis culture. The smoothing and polishing showed evidence of abrasive techniques using materials and methods that weren't found elsewhere in Dikwi material culture. The final surface finishing achieved a level of perfection that required sustained effort by master craftsmen working with techniques that left no other trace in the archaeological record. What makes the spheres even more challenging to our understanding of ancient American capabilities is their cultural isolation. No other pre-Columbian culture in the Americas produced similar spherical stone monuments. The technique appears to have been unique to the Dikwis region, developing in isolation and disappearing when the culture declined after European contact. How did such sophisticated stoneworking knowledge develop without apparent precedents or influences from other cultures? The mathematical precision also raises questions about Diki, astronomical and geometric knowledge. Some researchers have proposed that the sphere arrangements correspond to star patterns or seasonal alignments, suggesting sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics. Others have noted that the mathematical relationships between sphere sizes follow patterns that indicate complex numerical understanding that exceeds what archaeologists typically associate with pre-Columbian American mathematics. What continues to puzzle researchers most profoundly is how a culture with relatively simple material technology achieved such mathematical and engineering precision. The contrast between the sphere's geometric perfection and the Dikwi people's otherwise typical Stone Age toolkit suggests capabilities that our models of technological development can't easily explain. We've travelled from the peat bogs of Denmark, where ancient bodies rest perfectly preserved, to the caves of Romania, where aluminum shouldn't exist. From the limestone quarries of Turkey, where impossible maps were drawn, to the jungles of Costa Rica, where perfect stone spheres lie scattered in the dirt. They reveal the thin line between the history we think we know and the mysteries that exist just beneath our feet or hidden in museum archives. In every case, we found the same truth. The past is far stranger and more complex than we imagine,